longer doing a very good job in our public schools of teaching civics and government in this country.
Were you disappointed that President Bush couldn't find a woman to replace one of his two women on the Supreme Court?
I was, because it took so long to get one, and now we're back to one.
That was the late Sandra Day O'Connor talking to me in 2006.
That was Hard Talk. I'm Jeff Goods. You're listening to CBC Radio 1. Have a great day.
Good morning, Manitoba, and welcome to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg and worldwide on our CBC Manitoba YouTube channel and the CBC Listen app. I'm Emily Brass in this week for Marcy Marcusa, and with us are Pat Kanuga, our show director, our studio technician, Abby Adeyemi, Travis Peterson, who's the producer of our CBC Manitoba YouTube channel, and joining him today is Brad Lillies. Heather Wells is in the newsroom with our CBC News headlines.
Good morning. Well, people in St. Teresa Point First Nation are getting the attention of the federal Indigenous Services Minister. You may recall earlier this week we shared stories of people in the community living in overcrowded houses filled with mold, desperate for help. Well, the federal minister, Patty Hajdu, says St. Teresa Point did receive more than $4 million last year for housing, but she says the government's open to looking at more options. So we'll hear more from her coming up. And a Winnipeg family is adjusting its holiday menu this year because of the high cost of food. Gumsi Alcasabas says his family of 6 celebrates the holidays with Filipino dishes, hospitality through food, but this year he expects less variety on the table. We'll hear more coming up in our next local news at 6:30.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
That's CBC's Heather Wells. Well, here's what's coming up on the show. With the holiday season upon us, people are struggling to keep up with the cost of food, and many are relying more on food banks. We'll hear from Tasha Lackman. She's the executive director of the Depot Community Food Centre in Montreal. For some people, a trip to the dentist can spark fear. CBC's Blair Sanderson tries to drill down into people's anxieties as the federal government rolls out its new dental plan. Various employees have recently announced layoffs, and that has our mental health columnist Mark Hennick thinking about what it takes to stay resilient through job loss. He'll have some tips on that. But first, your holidays could be filled with Filipino holiday classics. We'll hear about a special concert coming up in Winnipeg. A mix of sun and clouds today in Winnipeg, high +1. Tonight, mainly cloudy in the evening, then partly cloudy overnight, going down to a low of -8. A mix of sun and clouds tomorrow with a high of -1. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM.
On Cue with Tom Power.
Few Canadian performances are as iconic as Megan Follows as Anne in the 1985 series Anne of Green Gables.
Plain old unromantic Anne Shirley.
Now Megan is revisiting the story in a new audio series, and she'll talk about how portraying Anne changed her life.
I always felt incredibly grateful.
That's coming up on Cue, followed by Commotion with Elamine Abdel Mahmoud on CBC Radio 1, the CBC Listen app, and everywhere you get your podcasts.
This is World Report. Good morning from CBC News. I'm John Northcott. We begin in London, where Prince Harry is celebrating a win in a landmark case against the Mirror Group newspapers. He claimed that more than 100 news stories were the result of unlawful information gathering, such as phone hacking. The trial considered 33 sample stories. London's High Court ruled that unlawful actions contributed to 15 of them, awarding Prince Harry more than 140,000 British pounds in damages. His lawyer delivered a statement on his behalf after the ruling.
I've been told that slaying dragons will get you burned. But in light of today's victory and the importance of doing what is needed for a free and honest press, it is a worthwhile price to pay. The mission continues.
This lawsuit is just one of many the Duke of Sussex has against British tabloids. Its victory could be a sign of more success down the line. A contentious gun control bill is on its way to become law in Canada. The Senate passed the Liberal government's C-21 bill yesterday. It was first introduced in May of 2022. and has since faced months of legislative hurdles and backlash. The bill will freeze handgun sales, increase penalties for firearms trafficking, and try to curb homemade untraceable ghost guns. While gun control advocacy groups welcome the passage of Bill C-21, many say the legislation unfairly targets lawful gun owners. The bill passed without any amendments by a vote of 60 to 24. In Vancouver, close to 1,000 pro-Palestinian demonstrators gathered outside a hotel where Justin Trudeau was speaking at a private Liberal fundraiser. The crowd was calling for the Prime Minister to cut off Canadian military support for Israel. Hundreds were waving Palestinian flags and holding signs saying "Free Palestine." Dozens of others lay under white sheets with what they called a die-in. The demonstration was organized in part by a group, Independent Jewish Voices. Tamara Herman is a member.
There's this belief that the Jewish community as a whole supports Israel and is standing against Trudeau's recent vote at the UN General Assembly in support of a ceasefire. And there's growing contingents of Jewish people everywhere who are deeply, deeply opposed to this. And so it's the last night of Hanukkah, and we're lighting candles for the liberation of Palestinians.
During his speech at the fundraiser, Trudeau did not directly refer to the Israel-Hamas war, referring only to what he called conflicts in the Middle East. Earlier in the week, Canada was among the 153 countries that voted for the UN resolution calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. Meanwhile, it's been another night of heavy bombardments in Gaza, with children among those reported killed in Khan Yunis and Rafah. Injured Palestinians are rushed to Nasser Hospital after an airstrike on Khan Yunis. A rising number of civilian deaths is a growing concern for the U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is spending a second day in the region. He's urging Israeli leaders to shift their tactics to exercise more precision in order to minimize the impact on civilians, but he's casting the blame for the high civilian casualties on the shoulders of Hamas.
Using civilians as human shields, using protected sites like hospitals and schools for military purposes, embedding themselves among the innocent Palestinian people, and continuing to fire rockets at Israeli cities, and continuing to go out on the airwaves and say, we're going to commit October 7th again and again and again.
Today, Sullivan will be in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank for talks with Palestinian Authority leaders. Meanwhile, the Israeli military says it has recovered the body of a hostage. The French citizen was kidnapped by Hamas from the Supernova Music Festival on the 7th of October. European Union leaders have failed to reach a deal to unlock $70 billion in new aid funding for Ukraine after a veto by Ukrainian Prime Minister, or rather Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. The deadlock happened just hours after leaders agreed to start long-awaited membership talks with Kyiv. Alex Kedier reports from the European Council in Brussels.
The EU's 27 leaders worked late into the night, frantically trying to break the deadlock. They hoped to convince Hungary's Viktor Orban to lift his opposition to the new multi-billion-dollar package of aid to Ukraine. The money, a mix of grants, loans and military support, would be a lifeline for the country as it staves off Russia's invasion. But Budapest won't budge. The leaders threw in the towel overnight, opting to try again at an emergency meeting in January. Belgium's Prime Minister Alexander De Croo says a deal is within reach. This will be a bittersweet moment for Ukraine. Earlier in the negotiations, EU leaders made the historic decision to open membership talks with Kyiv, a move which means the country can start on the long and complicated road to joining the European Union. But in the short term, fears of waning support here in Brussels and among lawmakers on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. will be a profound cause for concern for Ukraine. EU leaders say the country is not running out of money soon and that a deal on longer-term support is within reach. They'll be back here in January to try and get that over the line. Alex Cadier for CBC News at the European Council in Brussels.
2023 was a brutal year for natural disasters in Canada and also a record-setting year for the number of days the Canadian military spent on domestic operations. Now top commanders say troops are feeling the strain. The CBC's Murray Brewster has more.
We conducted 141 days in a row of Operation Lentis in 5 different provinces on 8 different operations.
Vice Admiral Bob Ochterlony, the military's operational commander, taking stock of the year that was in natural disasters and the number of times the military was called out to help. The wildfire evacuation of Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories, an example of where no one else but the military could have pulled it off. Octoloni is not sure, however, the same can be said for all provincial requests.
So the question becomes, do they require the Canadian Armed Forces sometimes? Sometimes they do, absolutely, not questioning that, but probably not every time.
Octoloni's remarks, coming as they do at the end of the country's worst wildfire season, reflect a growing frustration in the military, which is devoting more and more resources to something many believe is not part of its core function. The House of Commons Defense Committee has, for months, been wrestling with questions of whether soldiers should be fighting wildfires and cleaning up after hurricanes. Emergency Preparedness Minister Harjit Sajjan says a review is underway.
We're analyzing what type of things that the Canadian Armed Forces have been asked to do that can be done by somebody else, and only look at the Canadian Armed Forces for what is absolutely needed.
Defense Minister Bill Blair says he understands the concerns about overuse of the forces, but underlined the military is very much in the room when the decisions about domestic deployments are being made. Murray Brewster, CBC News, Ottawa.
The man responsible for the Humboldt Broncos bus crash is one step closer to deportation to India. The driver was sentenced to 8 years for causing the 2018 crash that killed 16 people and injured 13 others. Karen Pauls reports.
Our family forgave Mr. Sidhu a while ago now, and it wasn't so much to set Mr. Sidhu free, but it was to set our family free.
Scott Thomas will forever mourn the loss of his son Evan in the crash, but he has written letters supporting Jaskirat Singh Sidhu being allowed to stay in Canada.
To our family, it doesn't matter where he is, whether he's here or over in India. I think he's going to suffer with his actions and the consequences of those for the rest of his life.
Toby Boulet's son Logan was also killed in the crash. He doesn't ever want to see Sidhu again.
We don't expect Mr. Sidhu to rot in jail, and that's never was our intention. But part of it in our mind is that he gets deported and he just disappears.
Sidhu will be summoned to an immigration hearing in the new year, says his lawyer, Michael Green.
There's nothing really to decide. They just confirmed that he has a conviction, that he's not a citizen, and therefore they will issue a deportation order.
He'll lose his permanent residency status, but before he's deported, there will be a pre-removal assessment. If they find there's any risk, he could be granted protected person status in Canada. Sidhu will also make a final appeal to stay on humanitarian and compassionate grounds. He and his wife, who's a nurse and a Canadian citizen, have a 9-month-old baby boy with serious health problems.
And overarching consideration is the best interest of any child. And of course, his 9-month-old child would factor into that.
None of that changes the minds of Broncos families who are suing Sidhu and the government for damages, says their lawyer, Kevin Meller.
They know that their children will never experience a family life or love or marriage or anything.
Karen Pauls, CBC News, Winnipeg.
And finally, Toronto's iconic Yonge Dundas Square is getting a new name, Sankofa Square. City Council voted late last night to rename the popular intersection and drop the Dundas name because of Henry Dundas's connections to the transatlantic slave trade. The new name, Sankofa, originates in Ghana and refers to the act of reflecting on the teachings from the past. And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. I'm John Northcott. This is CBC News.
We're going to be experiencing a mix of sun and cloud today. The temperature is going to be hovering around -1 with light winds. So throughout today, expect that mix of sun and cloud to continue. And as mentioned, we are going to be heading to a high of -1. Tonight, as the night descends, Winnipeg will turn mainly cloudy and then gradually clearing after midnight, and the temperature will drop to a low of -3. Currently in Winnipeg, we are at -4 degrees at the Forks. No reports in traffic yet. If you see anything you want us to know, let us know. 788-3093.
Coming up on 13 minutes after 6 o'clock, and you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1. I'm Emily Brass, in this week for Marcy Marcusa. First today, a major Christmas celebration is set to happen in our Filipino community here in Winnipeg, and you're invited.
Okay, tell me about this song that you guys are performing.
Kumu Kuti Kutita. It's a song by Ryan Cayabyab, which depicts the Christmas scene in the Philippines. You have these all bright lights, sparkling, shining, glittering. It just hypes up the excitement of the times of the season for the holidays. That's what you see in the Philippines. Everything's bright, lit up. Kumu Kuti Kutita.
Kumu Kuti Kutita. Bright and shining.
You're the Musica Singers of Manitoba, and we just heard from Jesse Alcacabas, who's marketing director for the Musica Singers, and the group's artistic director and conductor, Oscar Pantaleon Jr. Founded in 2019, the Singers have performed across the city with the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra and at Jets games. They're rehearsing for their upcoming holiday concert, Musically Yours, this Christmas. CBC's Jim Agapito attended their rehearsal.
Christmas plays a lot in the lives of Filipinos. You know, we start celebrating Christmas September 1st, and we end Three Kings in January. So that's about how many months of the year? A quarter?
Almost a quarter.
A quarter of the year just for Christmas. We love Christmas, and doing a Christmas concert here in Winnipeg is like bringing home our hearts to the Philippines.
It's an advantage for our part, right? Because we miss the Philippines. Let's bring Philippines here.
Tell me a little bit about the concert.
We have two parts of the concert, actually. The first section is traditional Christmas carols, Christmas songs you hear in the airwaves by Mariah Carey or the recent popular artist Alexandra Burke. You'll hear some versions of Josh Groban in the mix. And the second part is the all Filipino repertoire. We feature also our traditional caroling songs and then new songs composed by our national artists, Ryan Cayabyab. So we have an offering for everyone because, you know, in the Philippines we hear all songs, all of these music. So everyone will be familiar with most of the songs, and we'll be introducing them to new melodies as well.
How excited is that for you to share that with Winnipeggers, maybe that aren't Filipino?
How great it is to see a choral group, Filipino immigrants mostly, singing traditional Philippine Christmas carols, right? And then some of like what Oscar said, the English versions, which probably you know. Like my kids, when I say, hey, come on, let's sing Christmas carols, they all know Canadian songs and the Western Christmas carols. And then I make them sing Noche Buena songs, or you know what Noche Buena is, right? So Noche Buena is the feast. Usually you celebrate that right before midnight. So we have that song, which now we are able to sing it in front of people. I don't know when was the last time that we actually had Filipino Christmas carols. I don't remember. And it's the perfect time actually because it's going to happen on December 16, which is the first day of Simbang Gabi. Simbang Gabi is there a term?
We have these rosary masses, a series of masses leading to Christmas. 9 evenings of masses. Sometimes evenings, sometimes early dawn.
Early dawn.
Yeah.
Dawn masses. That's what it calls.
There's a word for it in Spanish, Misa de Gallo. Mass of the Birds, because it's a time, it's too early in the morning. You celebrate Christmas, and you have to, as children, we had to complete all the 9.
Yes, and you get
masses.
to have a wish. You have to have the wish on the last one. So this is interesting. And we're actually starting it on the first day, the 16th. That's why we chose December 16th.
You have a group of Filipino singers. Why is that it's so important for Winnipeg, and what does that mean?
We're building on that reputation of Filipinos. Yes. Filipinos love to sing, and we don't have a real community choir of Filipinos in here. I think they've had it in the past, but they're not here anymore, and we'd like to continue what they did. So we appreciate that the ones who came before us have done something similar, and we'd like to continue that so that we may be heard, literally and figuratively, in the community. What Christmas is like in the Philippines and for Filipinos.
Yes.
What does it mean to lead them into, a Christmas concert, which is significant for the community?
In Musica Singers, we're just like a family. So singing together and putting up a project, especially in this meaningful time like Christmas, it fills our hearts. Yeah. It fills us with joy. It's one way of us reaching out to the community, not only for that, but also for building stronger bonds together as a group.
Because I don't have my immediate family here. So, Musica family, actually, when we had that group, I don't have to go anywhere else now for Christmas. Because now I don't have to go to California, because there's a family here whom I love singing with, and they have the same passion, they have the same, we all wanted the same thing, not to compete with each other, but to actually bring out the best in each other. So Christmas now, not just for singing, but because he built this relationship with, we're all coming from different walks of life. We envisioned something similar as well. We created the group, and now we're trying to deliver what we would like to. For you to feel, if you watch us, you would see, oh, it's not just about singing. There's a good rapport among these singers. And what's the best way to celebrate? It's Christmas. It's all about love, right? Love, Christmas, family.
What can all of Winnipeggers expect if they come to the concert?
Come to the concert and have a taste of what Filipino Christmas sounds like. It's a buffet of sounds that we're presenting on December 16th at the Laudamus Auditorium of CMU.
And all the feelings and emotions that you would like. I cannot explain it, but during the 16th of December, you feel something different. I don't know what it is. I don't know, it's the crisp air, the music from churches, if you go to churches for these masses. But this one, it's not even in a mass. You're just going to be singing along. And hearing those takes you back, especially for us.
That was CBC's Jim Agapito at a rehearsal with the Musica Singers. The Musically Yours This Christmas concert happens at the Canadian Mennonite University this Saturday.
It's enough to make you sing. CBC Music unwraps the gift of song with hearth-warming classics and new holiday favorites. Choral, global, roots, funk, soul, and more. Ring in the Yuletide season with your favorite CBC Music hosts as they invite you home for the holidays. Starting Christmas Eve with Tom Allen and A Cringe-Worthy Christmas. Then, from sunup to sundown, Christmas Day on CBC Radio 1 and on the CBC Listen app.
20 minutes after 6 o'clock, and you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1. I'm Emily Brass, filling in for Marcy Marcusa. Right now, it's -4 at the Forks, and we're going up to a high of +1 today. A mix of sun and clouds tonight, mainly cloudy in the evening, then partly cloudy overnight, going down to a low of -8. Tomorrow, a mix of sun and clouds, high -1. For Sunday, a mix of sun and clouds and windy with a high of -4. There's going to be some gusts up to 50 kilometers an hour in the afternoon. And looking ahead to early next week, mainly sunny on Monday with a high of -6, so a little bit cooler on Monday. The holiday season is a time for food, family, and loved ones. Still, more Canadians are using food banks this year, pushed by the costs of food and inflation. This level of demand is prompting discussion about how to meet the need and different ways to fight hunger. Joining us now with more is Tasha Lackman, Executive Director of the Depot Community Food Centre in Montreal. Hi, Tasha.
Good morning. How are you today?
Pretty good, thanks. So what are some of the challenges people are facing this year?
Yeah, the demand for our services is up. We know that 1 in 5 people in Canada are experiencing food insecurity. So almost 7 million Canadians, and this is huge. This isn't just people, you know. This means that not only are people hungry, but they are, you know, not less able to concentrate at work, less able to excel in school, becoming more and more isolated. And it's really the community organizations across the country that are part of the Community Food Centres of Canada network and others are facing this with really limited resources.
Yeah, that takes a toll. And how has that situation changed from last year?
Well, we know that use of food banks since last year has increased by 32%, and since 2019, it's increased by 78.5%. So the need is huge and it's growing. We keep talking about an affordability crisis, and we can't talk about an affordability crisis without talking about food insecurity. We're in a crisis here, and we need systemic solutions to these issues.
And how can the community help with that?
I think the community is an important part of really a Band-Aid solution of making sure that people have food in this crisis. And we really rely on the community across the country to make sure that we are continuing to serve the community as best we can. But the issue is an income issue. So it is really a question of public policy at the federal, provincial, and municipal levels, ensuring affordable housing, ensuring that people have enough income, that minimum wage is a livable wage, that unemployment benefits are fair, that social transfers are fair and that are livable, so that people don't have to choose between paying their rent, buying warm clothes, or groceries.
And so how does all of this impact your ability this holiday season to help Canadians?
We are in crisis as an organization as well, and this is not unique to us at the Depot in Montreal. This is something that's happening across the country. You know, we've had to, over the past several months, cut the size of our food baskets. We're unfortunately having to turn people away. We cannot meet the demand with the resources that we have. That said, during the holidays, we want to make sure that we meet as many people as possible. We've extended our hours, and you know, organizations across the country are hosting community meals and trying to really create senses of belonging and celebration, even in a time of crisis.
And has that changed, like, what you are handing out to people?
Yeah, as of June 1st, we cut our food basket size by 1/3 in order to meet the growing demand. Last year we served 10,000 baskets, and this year we're going to serve 20,000 different families and households. So we have no choice but to cut somewhere, and that's in the quantity that people are getting when they come in.
And you talked about some of the bigger solutions. You know, what are some different approaches to fighting hunger and meeting people's nutritional needs that you would like to see?
Yeah, I think that's interesting the way you asked about the nutritional needs. We have a healthy food policy, so we know that food is a basic human right, and in a country like Canada that's rich, we need to be making sure that everybody has access to healthy, good quality food in a dignified manner. But again, this is an income issue. So this means that we need solutions that are at that level so people can have agency and autonomy and go buy their food and not have to rely on food banks. We would love to imagine a future where, community food centers across the country are a place where people gather and enjoy food and eat healthy food, but that it's not because they're hungry, it's because they come to have a sense of belonging and to break isolation and to see their friends and to celebrate and learn new recipes. We don't want to be a frontline organization. We don't want this need to even exist. And we know the solutions for that, but they're not delivered on. Last year in the budget, there was a $500 grocery rebate for folks. And this year, food insecurity wasn't even mentioned in the federal budget. So we really need to make sure that we are looking at food insecurity, looking at poverty, and making clear measures to address this across the country.
And I was at the Depot's holiday dinner years back when I was a reporter in Montreal. What are some of the initiatives planned at the Food Centre over this holiday season?
This season, we have again a holiday meal on December 22nd. We pull out all the stops, turkey and gravy and mashed potatoes and so many sides. Our chef always outdoes himself. So it will be a delicious meal. There's decorations. There's really a feeling of celebration. And then there's, of course, other activities planned across the country and across all the different communities. It is a time of coming together, even in crisis.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Tasha, and all the best for your holiday plans.
Thank you, and all the best to you.
Thank you. Tasha Lackman is Executive Director of the Depot Community Food Center in Montreal. On a Yuletide night. Their new album is called A Winter Collection. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg. The news is next.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 6:30 it is -4. And if you liked yesterday, the good news is you get a little bit more of it today. Mix of sun and clouds, still mild, a high of 1. Remembering a Winnipeg-born Jewish humanitarian. Hundreds paying tribute to Vivian Silver at the Asper Jewish Community Campus yesterday. Silver died in the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th. Her son, Chen Zeigen, says his mother has become a symbol in the ongoing war.
What she can represent is that future of Zionism and the ability for the Jewish people to live in Israel with security and peace lies only within the understanding that there needs to be coexistence side by side with the Palestinian people.
Silver lived on a kibbutz near the Israel-Gaza border. Working from home full-time has hit the end of the road for some workers at Manitoba Public Insurance. The auto insurer has told staff it's moving to a hybrid work model for most employees. That's going to align MPI with other government departments and Crown corporations. Starting in late February, most of MPI's staff will be in the office 5 days out of every 10 days they work. It's going to impact about 400 employees who have been working from home full-time. Kate Fensky heads the downtown Winnipeg Biz.
Whether it's a Crown Corporation or a private company that is committed to our downtown, that is investing in our downtown and wants our downtown to be successful, having more people here not only improves vibrancy, but it also improves safety. So hearing that hundreds more people might be coming back to work downtown is great news.
But the Union for the Workers says many are upset. The Manitoba Government and General Employees Union says it would have thought MPI would try to rebuild relationships following the strike rather than upsetting workers. The family of a 20-year-old homicide victim says she was a caring young mother with a vibrant spirit. Ava Zaber died after being shot November 21st on Burroughs Avenue. She leaves behind a 4-year-old son. Her sister, Kelsey, says Ava loved being a mom and was going back to school to get her high school diploma.
The little boy changed her for the better. She had so many goals and ambitions, and a life she had envisioned for them.
A 20-year-old man has been charged with second-degree murder. People in St. Theresa Point First Nation are getting the attention of the federal Indigenous Services Minister. Earlier this week, CBC shared stories of people in the community living in overcrowded houses full of mold, desperate for help. Federal Minister Patty Hajdu says St. Theresa Point received more than $4 million last year for housing, but the government, she says, is open to looking at more options to meet the community's housing needs.
This is a conversation I'm happy to have with the chief to understand better how we support his ambition and his vision for the future of the community.
St. Theresa Point is home to some 4,000 people. The chief says they need about 300 homes. Hungary has blocked a $55 billion package of European aid for Ukraine after an agreement was reached on starting formal talks on Ukraine's application to join the bloc. European Council President Charles Michel says aid talks would now resume next year.
26 leaders agreed on the NATO box in all its components, and one leader couldn't agree. Support for Ukraine, migration, solidarity fund, defense. This is part of this NATO box, and it means that we will revert to this matter early next year, and we will try to get unanimity.
Ukraine is critically dependent on EU and U.S. funding as it continues fighting occupying Russian forces. You can hear more national and international news coming up on World Report at 7. Food inflation is changing how many of us are eating and stocking up on groceries. It's also impacting the holidays. CBC's Rosanna Hempel explains how one Winnipeg family is making ends meet.
Jessie Alcasabas keeps an organized pantry for her growing family of 6, especially with soaring prices at the grocery store.
Prices really have gone crazy.
The Alcasabas family celebrates the holidays with Filipino dishes and traditions, but her husband Gumsy says this year they won't have as many choices.
Because of the beef right now, the prices, I don't think that's part of the menu now. We're just going to opt to something else.
Although food inflation could ease off in 2024, Canada's latest food price report expects a family of 4 will spend about $700 more next year than in 2023. For Alcasabas, buying bulk, freezing deals and smaller portions on top of meal planning all help maintain bills in their budget.
I look at the prices and I have to compare. Where can I save more? Which is better in the deal?
It's an added step, but they're celebrating being together. Rosanna Hempel, CBC News, Winnipeg.
You can find more Manitoba news updated throughout the day. Just head to cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
That's Heather Wells from the CBC Newsroom. You're listening to Information Radio, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg. I'm Emily Brass, filling in for Marcy Marcusa. Travis Peterson is producer of our CBC Manitoba YouTube channel, and we're live now worldwide. We're also on TV this hour and on the Listen app, so wherever you are, hope you're doing good today. Our show director is Pat Kanuga. Abby Adiemi is our studio technician, and he joins us now with a look at the weather.
Thanks, Emily. Currently in Winnipeg, we are at -4. Let's give you a regional forecast now of what the rest of the province, some part of the province looks like. Brandon is currently partly cloudy, and it's at -7. They'll be heading to a high of 0 today. Tonight, it's going to be clearing and then drop to -4. Good morning, Thompson. How are you doing today? You are currently clear at -11. You're heading to a high of -4 today. Churchill is going to be having a bit of sun and cloud all through the day with a high of currently sitting at -15 and heading to a high of -13. Gimli is currently at 7 at high of 0. Morden and Winkler is currently at -4, heading to a high of -1. Melita is at -7, heading to a high of 0. And the Whiteshell is currently at -5, heading to a high of 0. Hotspots in the province is actually Macri. It's currently at 2 degrees. And the cold spot for today is Tudor Lake, currently at -19.2. Winnipeg is currently at -4 degrees. No reports of stalls and crashes yet. If you see anything, let us know. 788-3093.
Good morning, and you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg and worldwide on our CBC Manitoba YouTube page and the CBC Listen app. I'm Emily Brass. Time now for some business news. Phil DeMont is here with today's CBC Business Report. Good morning, Phil.
You know why I like Abby?
Why?
Well, because I bought fufu one day, which is kind of an African paste that you make from cassava and plantain. Didn't know what to do with it, so I emailed him and he sent me back a recipe.
Oh, nice. Oh, he's a swell guy, and we're really glad to have him here. Keeps the spirits up in the morning, too.
Indeed.
So what's going on with the business news today, Phil?
Well, November is another weak month for Canada's real estate market, at least for sellers. That's according to the Canadian Real Estate Association. Right now, mortgages are at a 5-year mortgages, interest rate's about 6%. Back in March, the rate would have been a little above 5%. So November sales came in light. They were down 0.7%, according to CREA. That's the 5th month in a row that national home sales fell from the previous month. As a rough estimate, because I eyeballed this, the number appears to be down about 13% from the more recent high of sales back in June. The average Canadian home price dropped in November, down 1.1% versus October. But home prices are up about 0.5% nationally if you compare them to 12 months ago. It's the trend people are worried about. New listings, they fell almost 2% in the month, and they also fell in October 2.2%. That's important because the way it's lining up now, experts say, is that the market now favors buyers, not sellers. And that might change, though, because Laura LePage has a forecast out this month saying for next year, the median home price across Canada will rise about 5.5%. So that implies that more buyers are going to start, or sellers are going to start coming in, and that's going to push up prices. Looking more closely at Winnipeg, in November sales were down compared to October, but prices for a detached home, because that's what I was comparing, they were up in the month compared to last month.
Interesting. So a lot of the supply problems North America's economy has experienced over the past couple of years have been eliminated, but not all of them. What's happening in the Panama Canal?
Yeah, believe it or not, it's running out of water. An ongoing drought means fewer ships are getting through the canal, and the backlog could mean problems for the American economy. That's because 2 out of every 3 ships, they go through the canal. They're taking something to or from U.S. markets, but there's not enough fresh water to get the usual number of boats through the waterway. It turns out Panama Canal only uses fresh water to float boats, and the ongoing drought has reduced the amount of available fresh water from the man-made lake that they have that feeds into the canal. They don't take seawater, they take fresh water. So they've had to cut the number of daily slots for ships down to 24 from 32, and in February, they're going to cut it again to 18. So that's almost half where they were. If you don't have a reservation, because you can just show up to the canal, the old days, your average Atlantic to Pacific transit time took you about 2 days. Now the wait's more than 11 days. Experts say prices for consumer goods in the U.S. might rise, but the delays are more likely to impact American goods going to foreign ports.
Interesting. And moving now to some sports business news. A Major League Baseball player signed the richest deal in baseball history. Why is the agreement also a financial win for the team?
Yeah, I find this fascinating. It's how the contract's structured. Shohei Ohtani's the player. He's famous for being the first two-way player since Babe Ruth. Terrific starting pitcher, fearsome power hitter, signed a deal with the Los Angeles Dodgers in the offseason. $700 million over 10 years or $70 million a year. But $680 million of that money is deferred until 2033. He was only going to get paid $2 million a year for the next 10 years. But for Ohtani, the deferral is important because that means he's going to pay California's high income tax on that $2 million each year for the next 10 years. After 2033, he can move to a low tax state and pay tax on the $680 million in annual cash that he'll get at a much lower rate. The Dodgers, they face a salary cap, $237 million, but under baseball rules, they don't count the $70 million they're paying him each year. They only count $45 million. That gives them more money to pay other players. Unique contract, but I suspect other players like Connor Bedard, think about that. He'll start looking at this for a model for the future because it saves him a lot of tax money.
Wow. So what's happening in markets so far this morning?
Right now, decent day in Europe, Germany, France, up about 0.5%. The UK is down. More of a split screen in China. Hong Kong benefiting from the interest rate announcement in the US, up almost 2.5% today. But Shanghai pulled down by the weak Chinese domestic economy, down 0.5%. Oil up 32 cents, $71.90 a barrel. And the Canadian dollar up about 1/5 of a cent, 74.73 cents US.
Thanks so much, Phil.
Thanks, Emily.
That was Phil DeMont with the business news. It's 6:42 and you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg. I'm Emily Brass. Millions of Canadians will soon have better access to dental care. The federal government unveiled details earlier this week about its new Canadian Dental Care Plan, and it'll pay for all or part of the cost of various dental services for uninsured Canadians whose household income is under $90,000. That applies to roughly 9 million Canadians. That got CBC's Blair Sanderson thinking about how people feel about going to the dentist.
Hello.
Hello.
How often do you go to the dentist?
Twice a year.
3 times a year.
Like every 2 years?
Not as much as I should.
How often?
Probably like 8 years.
I haven't been for about 10 years.
Why haven't you been in 10 years?
I have a thing about dentistry. I don't like dentists. I don't like having to go.
The smell, the atmosphere.
Wait, what is it about the atmosphere?
It's scary. Everybody seems to be nervous there every time you go there.
Because it hurts.
What hurts?
The needles, the poking and prodding. Never look forward to going to the dentist, no.
Even the sound of the instruments, right?
What is it? What's the sound?
I hate it. It's not ideal having someone who, you can't talk back to in your mouth saying dead-end questions and that kind of thing to you.
So for you, it's the social awkwardness of the dentist that's the problem.
Absolutely.
And what do you make of this program that basically anyone with a household income of under $90,000 and who is not insured under some other plan will have all or part of some dentistry procedures covered? What do you think of that?
I think it's good because I retire this year and everything that I have on my plan is I don't have a plan no more.
How much of a burden would it be, do you think, if you had to pay out of pocket for all of your dental procedures?
Oh, it's nothing to spend $500 and again, you get to wake up with an abscess tomorrow and you don't know what the price could be.
Your mouth is like a ticking financial time bomb.
It is, yeah.
It's very expensive if you don't have a plan. I have a plan at work and it still doesn't cover everything. So people who don't have plans, I don't know how they afford anything these days, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, just going for a checkup.
What about you, ma'am?
I have some teeth, and next time I go to the dentist, it will be to get the rest of them out.
I see, so you've had some pulled already.
Yeah, they were just way too painful.
Do you think that your teeth are in the shape that they're in now because you weren't going to the dentist?
Yes. Yes, back in the day when I should have gone to the dentist, it was extremely expensive and I wasn't covered, so yes.
So what do you make of this program that's being announced, that offering dental care to more people who can't afford it?
If it goes through, I think it's a good thing. If people benefit from it, I think it's a great thing.
Your smile and your teeth are usually one of the first things people see about you, so I think it's pretty important.
Can I see the smile? Yeah, there you go. Well, what advice do you have to people who get afraid of the dentist? They get the sound of that drill or the scraping?
Focus on what's actually happening and how it feels instead of the sound.
I think it's a necessary thing, and I think it's just kind of a stigmatized thing a lot of people are scared of just because they don't understand it enough.
So when you go, happy as can be?
More so looking forward to the work that can be done and what I can learn about myself to do better.
When I walk out from there, I feel really good, and that's why I like it. Right. Maybe at the moment it's not really pleasant, but I feel really good when I walk out there.
Cool. All right, well, keep smiling.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was CBC's Blair Sanderson talking to people about the new Canadian Dental Care Plan. It's rolling out in stages. Applications for coverage will first open for eligible seniors over the age of 87. Other age groups will be phased in, with those over 18 eligible to get coverage sometime in the year 2025.
Christmas is a time for magic.
The talking snowman. Well, you don't surprise me anymore.
For tradition.
Gwen just has to have a present from Santa. You do it, Arthur.
And a time for love.
Be kind. And if you really want to see what people are, all you have to do is look.
Enjoy holiday favorites all Christmas Day on CBC and CBC Gem.
Good morning. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg. I'm Emily Brass. Well, we're heading towards the end of another year, which means it's time for toasts. Whether around the holiday table or at the New Year's party, Jay Hart has a great song for lifting a glass. It's called Toast to Us. Warmed up. That got me rocking here in my seat. That was South Korean singer-songwriter Jay Hart with Toast to Us. It's 10 minutes before 7 o'clock and you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1. I'm Emily Brass. Well, if you're getting gifts for your children in your life, you might be considering the educational benefits of your choices, but that doesn't mean your presents have to be boring. Joining us now with more is Cynthia Baker, a speech language pathologist with the Regina Speech Center. Hi, Cynthia.
Good morning.
So how important are toys to a child's development?
You know, toys are we always say play is children's work. and the toys are the tools to the play. So they actually are quite important for their development.
So in light of that, what makes a toy educational?
Yeah, definitely don't listen to the packaging. When you go to the store, it can be confusing, right? Everything says it's an educational toy. We tend to look at, we have created 5 principles we follow when we're purchasing toys that we work with children with. 1, will it last over lifespan or different years of your child's development? So it doesn't, no batteries, because not always, but often battery-based things do one thing, and so that means it won't last over the years. We often look at, does it foster resourcefulness and problem solving? Does it promote pretend play? And does it promote interaction? And so if it usually answers those yes to those questions, usually it is an educational toy.
That's funny. That's something we've had gripes about here is the toys with batteries. Yeah. And so what are So what are some good toys for younger children or toddlers?
Absolutely. You know what? Looking at classics, honestly, toddlers and especially babies are just playing with the things around them, and they don't really care what the toy is. And so, you go to the store and you're bombarded by all these latest and greatest baby toys. Really, your babies often, and toddlers especially, are just happy playing with the Tupperware. So looking for some classic toys, for instance, like a great set of nesting blocks, because when they're little, they can bang them first, and then as they get older, they can stack them together and work on that brain work, and then as they get older, they can build towers and knock them down, and then as they get even older, they can use it for pretend play, like garages for their cars. So just looking for some classic toys like that that are going to last over the lifespan would really be great.
Yeah. And then what about kids who are school-aged?
Definitely school-age kids sort of split apart. So when they're littler, school-age, still great pretend play sets you can't go wrong with, like a great farm set or a great kitchen or a great dollhouse. And I mean, those can even be built around their favorite characters that they love from TV or books. And then as kids get a little bit older, it gets trickier because they aren't doing as much of that type of play anymore. So you might want to look more at things that create that they have to create, like Lego or craft sets. And then as they get even older, great board games can be a great alternative.
And then how about digital toys or, anything with a screen? Like what impact have those had on children's development recently?
We do know it has an impact. I think it's a tricky world. We can't get away from it. It's part of our life. It's part of my life and my house with my kids. But we do know the research says it actually doesn't impact their development, especially their language development, positively. So is it going to make our list for educational toys? No. What you can do instead is look for things that help balance that out. So can you actually offer experiences or times with you or a board game, things that mean that kids are going to be face-to-face with other people to balance out the time that they're going to spend on screens.
Yeah. And so before we let you go, are there any other cool toys that you're recommending this year?
Absolutely. Sure. Melissa and Doug, big fan of their company. They always produce great toys. They have a really fun kind of like pilot dashboard that got released this year that people might want to look for. You can't go wrong with some of the great game companies like Ravensburger, Peaceful Kingdom, and Haba always have great games. Like for little guys, First Orchard and Dragon's Breath out of Haba are great. Also, as kids get a little bit older, you can't go wrong with some of those really great games like Azul or Ticket to Ride that have been really popular in the past few years.
What's so cool about those?
Well, they're great like strategy games, and adults like them all the way down to sort of school-age kids. So it's a nice game that your whole entire family can enjoy. A little bit of sabotage. You never go wrong as a family with games that involve a little bit of sabotage and trying to beat out the other person.
And probably that interaction with the family is educational too, right?
Absolutely. Face-to-face time is where it's at. So from little kids all the way up to older kids, we know that we're all on our screens. We can't avoid it. So looking for toys and games and activities that we do together is a wonderful way to balance that out.
Thanks so much for joining us, Cynthia.
Okay, thanks.
Cynthia Baker is a speech-language pathologist with the Regina Speech Center.
Oh, holy night, the star is brightly shining. That's all.
That's all you got, Mom?
Yeah.
Hi, it's me, Jim Agapito. And that, of course, is my Yuletide-loving mom, Yolanda. She is my unofficial guide, and heck, the star of my CBC podcast, Recovering Filipino. She taught me all sorts of things about being Filipino, but we never got to tackle one of the biggies, Christmas. Join me for a special Recovering Filipino, the longest Christmas season in the world. You can hear it here on CBC Radio 1 at noon on Boxing Day, or you can find it on the CBC Listen app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Whether it's breaking news from around the world, across the country, or in your own hometown, it's all at your fingertips on the CBC News app. Get the top stories from where you live under the local tab, or watch video clips, live events, and the national on your smartphone or tablet. Get all the news you want, when you want it, where you want it, with the CBC News app. Download the app for free today.
Good morning. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg. It's -4 right now at the Forks, going up to a high today of +1. Heather Wells is here with the CBC News headlines.
Good morning. Well, remembering a Winnipeg-born Jewish humanitarian. Hundreds paying tribute last night to Vivian Silver at the Asper Jewish Community Campus. Silver died in the Hamas attack on Israel October 7th. Her sons spoke to the gathering last night, as did her sister. We're going to hear from some family coming up. And people in St. Teresa Point First Nation are getting the attention of the federal Indigenous Services Minister. Earlier this week, we shared the stories of people there living in overcrowded houses full of mold. Well, the federal minister, Patty Hajdu, says the government is open to looking at options to meet the community's housing needs. Those stories and more in our next local news coming up at 7:30.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
That's Heather Wells from the CBC Manitoba newsroom. It's pretty quiet right now in traffic, but maybe you're hearing something or seeing something out there. If so, give us a call. That number is 788-3093. And it might be a bit slippery out there, so be careful when you're, on the sidewalk or walking through a parking lot. Those places can be especially bad because they're not always covered with salt as well as the main arteries. So hope you're all doing well out there. Quick look at the forecast. A mix of sun and clouds today with a high of 1. Mainly cloudy this evening, then partly cloudy overnight with a low of -8. And tomorrow, Saturday, a mix of sun and clouds with a high of -1. Well, still to come on Information Radio. Losing your job can be one of the most stressful challenges someone can face. And with recent layoff announcements from a number of employers, we'll chat with our mental health columnist, Mark Hennick, about what people can do to better weather job loss. And also, we've been hearing about different ways Manitobas spend, or rather save money by thrifting their gifts. So we'll hear from a woman who waits until after the holidays to start gift shopping. That'll come up later in the show. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1 in Winnipeg. We'll also hear about a lack of adequate housing in St. Teresa Point First Nation and how that's led to some residents launching a class action lawsuit against the federal government. We've been hearing a bit about that in the news, and that's going to come on in the 8 o'clock hour. I'm Emily Brass, filling in this week for Marcy Marcusa. World Report is next.
On The Current.
This is the woman that Harvard has dubbed the next Einstein.
The universe is a hologram, says Sabrina Gonzalez-Patersky, and what we see as the world might be a projection from a wrapper that goes around all of existence. What exactly does that mean? She is here to explain, coming up on The Current.
The Current with Matt Galloway. This morning at 8:37, 9:07 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app.
This is World Report. Good morning from CBC News. I'm John Northcott. The new gun control bill is on its way to becoming law in Canada. The Senate passed the Liberal government's Bill C-21 late last night with no amendments. It introduces strengthened measures aimed at protecting Canadians from gun violence. Some highlights include freezing handgun sales, increasing penalties for firearms trafficking, and cracking down on homemade, untraceable ghost guns. But the legislation remains contentious. To walk us through the details, the CBC's Janice McGregor joins us from Ottawa. So, Janice, this final passage of C-21 doesn't really settle the question of what firearms are banned. Why not?
Well, it's not for lack of trying, John. This has been a multi-year fight, dating back to that first list of 1,500 firearms that the Trudeau government banned back in 2020 in the aftermath of the mass shooting in Nova Scotia. And then you might remember a second firestorm a year ago when the government's attempt to amend this bill, adding another long list of banned models, included a number of semi-automatic rifles that are popular with hunters and sport shooters. That fractured the Liberals' relationship with First Nations, as well as some New Democrats and even Liberal MPs that represent rural constituencies. Getting C-21 passed required a major political climb down, including pulling that list. And as a result, although this does make permanent a ban on new handgun sales and codify a new technical definition for what the Liberals call assault-style firearms, applying that definition, deciding which firearms that have been up to this point legal to own will now be reclassified, is going to be the job of a federal firearms advisory committee. Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc promised senators this fall that this group of experts will be reestablished. They'll take care to exclude rifles commonly used for hunting. And senators also advised the government to exclude guns popular with sport shooters as well. The government got burned for trying to legislate a list, but sooner or later, you do need a final list, in regulations at least, of what's legal and what's not.
So, Janice, what about that long-promised buyback program for legal gun owners who find themselves in possession of a banned firearm?
Well, that's another unfulfilled promise that dates back to that first announcement in 2020. The parliamentary budget officer estimated 2 years ago that compensation could add up to more than $750 million. Earlier this fall, the government extended the amnesty that's in place for these gun owners for 2 more years, going until October 2025. That suggests it is still a long way from getting these firearms out of circulation for good.
CBC's Janice McGregor in Ottawa. Thanks, Janice.
You're welcome.
Breaking this morning, Prince Harry is celebrating a win in a landmark case against the Mirror Group newspapers. He claimed more than 100 news stories were the result of unlawful information gathering, such as phone hacking. The trial considered 33 sample stories. London's High Court ruled that unlawful actions contributed to 15 of them, awarding Prince Harry more than 140,000 British pounds, about 240 Canadian dollars in damages. His lawyer delivered a statement on his behalf after the ruling.
I've been told that slaying dragons will get you burned. But in light of today's victory and the importance of doing what is needed for a free and honest press, it is a worthwhile price to pay. The mission continues.
This lawsuit, just one of many the Duke of Sussex has against British tabloids. This victory could be a sign of more success down the line. Hungary is not letting more European Union funding reach Ukraine. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban blocked EU aid worth more than 70 billion Canadian dollars, hours after the group agreed to formally open membership talks with Kyiv. Hungary, which maintains close ties with Russia, has long opposed EU membership for Ukraine, but did not veto that vote. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is walking a fine line on his visit to the Middle East.
As President Biden has said many times, Israel has a right, indeed a duty, to defend itself against Hamas.
Sullivan is trying to affirm U.S. support for Israel, even as he calls on its military to do more to minimize civilian casualties. He spent yesterday meeting with top Israeli leaders. Today, he'll be in the West Bank with Palestinian ones. As Abby Kugadazan reports, both Sullivan and the U.S. face a challenge in navigating the war.
As global pressure mounts for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, and Israel's government rejects this, the United States finds itself in an awkward position. A staunch ally, Washington has been voicing concern, but not consequences, for what much of the international community sees as disproportionate IDF military action in Gaza.
The United States has enormous leverage on Israel.
Matt Duss is the executive vice president of the Center for International Policy in Washington, D.C.
We provide Israel with $3.8 billion in military aid every year. We provide blanket diplomatic support. If we really wanted to stop the Israelis from doing what they're doing or get them to change their tactics, we could start deploying this leverage.
The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says more than 18,700 Palestinians have been killed in this conflict. The IDF says its pilots are precise and only target Hamas militants. But a leaked U.S. intel report shows that 45% of all air-to-ground munitions dropped by the IDF on Gaza since October 7th were unguided bombs. U.S. President Joe Biden has urged Israel to be more careful.
This president is good with words, but I constantly come back to the question, okay, if you support a two-state solution, as you say you do, and you have an Israeli government that explicitly opposes that, what are you going to do about it?
The U.S. says the Palestinian Authority, which governs the West Bank, will ultimately have a role to play in the future of Gaza. Abby Cuevas in CBC News, Berlin.
Back in this country, the BC Coroner's Service has issued a warning to people who use unregulated drugs as we inch closer to the holidays, which is often a deadly time of year for people who turn to drugs for comfort. It comes as the province is on track to record the highest drug-related death toll on record. Yvette Brend has the story.
Rock Carson clutches a garbage bag staring across Oppenheimer Park in Vancouver's downtown east side. The 24-year-old fentanyl user says he first tried opioids to try to understand his father, who he says died of an overdose.
It's the feeling people want to bond with something that they lost, like family or friends. They feel alone, so they use it to get something.
BC's Coroner Service is warning users like Carson not to use drugs when they're alone. Drug-related deaths climbed to a rate of 7 per day during the past 7 weeks. Premier David Eby spoke of the 13,000 people lost since the beginning of the opioid crisis in 2016 at the site of a new hospital under construction.
Fathers, mothers, sisters, brothers, it is an awful situation our province faces.
Now the province is on track to record the highest death toll on record. This as a drug called Tranq, which increases overdose and amputation risks, keeps showing up in street drug testing. And as the province continues to fight in court to certify a class action against pharmaceutical companies for their role in the ongoing opioid crisis. Yvette Brend, CBC News, Vancouver.
And finally, an alarming new report says Ontario's coaching ranks are lacking in diversity. Patrick Swadden has that story.
1, free throws 2.
April Deas loves coaching basketball at Crestwood Preparatory School in Toronto, but she says the sport is still a bit of a boys' club.
I find that there's not enough females coaching the game.
A new report from the Coaches Association of Ontario says she's right. The majority of coaches in Ontario are men, while racialized people are underrepresented. The report also says most coaches don't have National Coaching Certification Program training, which helps in handling critical issues like concussion protocols, youth mental health, and athlete development.
We saw in the survey results that those that are trained and certified feel more confident dealing with some of the more challenging parts of coaching.
Jeremy Cross is the executive director of the Coaches Association. Out of the 1,000 coaches surveyed, he says the report showed only 42% had any of that training.
Training takes time, capacity, and money. So we have to be very careful in how much training we're putting in front of these people.
Cross says that's especially the case as 3/4 of Ontario coaches are unpaid volunteers. Meanwhile, the association says it's working to get more women involved in coaching through mentorships.
I think it's really important to be able to see role models in that space.
Deas says when more and more young athletes see themselves reflected in their coaches, it helps them stick with the sport. Patrick Swadden, CBC News, Toronto.
And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. Remember, if you ever miss World Report, anytime, anywhere, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm John Northcott. This is CBC News.
Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg, worldwide on our CBC Manitoba YouTube channel and on the CBC Listen app. I'm Emily Brass, and I've been filling in all week for Marcy Marcusa. Here's what's coming up on this hour of the show. Federal Indigenous Services Minister Patty Hajdu says she's not surprised residents of St. Teresa Point First Nation are suing the government for lack of adequate housing. We'll hear from her later this hour. more. And we've been hearing this week from Manitobans who celebrate Thriftmas. We'll hear how one Manitoban's putting her own twist on the trend by waiting until after the holidays to do her gift giving. But first, various employers have recently announced layoffs. And that has our mental health columnist Mark Hennick thinking about what it takes to stay resilient through job losses. All that and more still to come on Information Radio. 11 minutes after 7 o'clock, time for news headlines with Heather Wells.
Good morning. Well, the Union for Manitoba Public Insurance Employees says many of its members are upset at having to move back to the office. The corporation is putting the brakes on full-time remote work for some workers. Starting in February, some 400 remote employees are going to be working downtown in the office, at least part-time. And having those hundreds of workers come back downtown is music to the ears of Kate Vensky at the Downtown Winnipeg Biz. We'll hear more from her coming up. And a Winnipeg family, as we talk about Christmas, is having to adjust its holiday menu this year because of the high cost of food. More on that as well coming up at 7:30.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
That's Heather Wells from the CBC News Desk. 11 minutes, just about 12 minutes actually, after 7 o'clock, and Abby Adeyemi has a look at the weather.
Good morning once again, Emily. Currently at the Fox, it is -4, and at the airport, it's currently -10, but mainly cloudy over there. Mainly clear over there, rather. Today, we'll be experiencing a mix of sun and cloud all through the day, and the temperature is going to be hovering around -1 degrees with light winds. That's going to be, we'll be expecting that mix of sun and cloud to continue all through the day. Tonight, as the night descends, Winnipeg will turn mainly cloudy and then gradually clearing after midnight, and the temperature will drop to a low of -3. Looking ahead at tomorrow, just get ready for a mainly sunny sky. The skies are going to be clear tomorrow. However, you need to brace yourself for increasing cloudiness late in the afternoon. The winds will shift definitely to the south, gusting from 20 to 30 after the afternoon, and then you'll be heading to a high of -1. Currently, sunrise will be at 8:20 this morning and sunset at 4:27 p.m. Nothing in traffic as we've been mentioning, but if you see anything, stalls or crashes, let us know. Give us a call at 788-3093. Once again in Winnipeg, it is -4.
Good morning, Manitoba. It's 13 minutes after 7 o'clock, and you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1. I'm Emily Brass. Well, losing your job can be one of the most stressful challenges that someone can face. CBC announced last week that up to 800 positions could be eliminated. That same day, the streaming giant Spotify said it has plans to lay off 1,500 workers. The week before, one of Canada's biggest banks, CIBC, reported 2,400 jobs have been cut at that financial institution over the past year. Statistics Canada compared this year to last and found that unemployed people this November were more likely to have been laid off from their previous job. Mark Hennick is author of So-Called Normal, a memoir of family, depression, and resilience. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning.
So let's talk about job loss. It's understandably stressful, but how else does job loss tend to affect our mental health?
Well, look, there's a great deal of research which shows that being laid off increases risk not just of mental health problems, but of a range of health conditions. The most common of them do tend to include stress-related illnesses like hypertension and heart disease. And when you think about it, I mean, a layoff can feel disempowering. You didn't do anything wrong. You were just going about your business and you happen to draw the short straw in these sorts of decisions. So I think, making sense of that, it can be hard to deal with. Yet it still puts people in the difficult position of being unemployed anyway, whether it's a layoff or not. And we know that does present some mental health risks. One of the most comprehensive summaries to look at this, it was a review of more than 300 studies, and it found that unemployed people are consistently more distressed, they're less satisfied with their lives, their marriages, their families, and they're much more likely to report psychological problems than people who are employed. So I think employers really need to keep this in mind when they're making these sorts of business decisions.
Yeah. And then, what about people hearing news about layoffs, but they haven't heard anything yet about their own job?
Yeah, the old layoff anxiety, where you're still employed, but it is or it feels precarious. This is especially common when you're around other people who are being laid off in your company, but it also sometimes happens just from the news cycle when you hear about a rise in layoffs. That's when I think that survivor's guilt sometimes starts to kick in, where you're wondering if you're next, why it was them, not you. That sort of hypervigilance, it interferes with your ability to focus on your job in the present. And it also, I think, short circuits your ability to envision and plan for your life long term. But I do think, though, that anxiety that you feel, whether you've just lost your job or you're fearing that you might, it doesn't necessarily have to lead to a frozen sort of fear response. Effectively managed anxiety, it can be helpful if it motivates action. So to do that, you need to return your focus to the present and really learn how to control your controllables.
Okay, controlling your controllables. Let's talk about that. What can people do to get through the news of a job loss?
Well, I mean, I can use myself as sort of learning in the trenches here, because I'd spent years building a consulting business where it was finally starting to become profitable, growing year over year. Wasn't just a side hustle for me anymore. It was my main gig. Then business conditions dramatically changed in March of 2020 at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. It all went up in smoke. It just disintegrated. The whole world shut down, of course, but I felt like so did my livelihood and my identity in some ways as a small business owner. I felt vulnerable, incompetent. Why didn't I see this coming? These waves of shock and denial and anger. But most of all, at the end of the day, I was just afraid for how I was going to support my family. I think, though, fortunately for me, I'd become resilient enough over the years where somewhere in my core, I just instinctively knew that I had to pivot. I had to do something.
So what did you do?
Well, I think, first of all, I learned. I learned a lot. And the first thing that I learned was that being unemployed can be a lot of work,
Yeah.
So I think my approach to that was a bit of both heart and head. And so here's what else I took away from it that I think can help other people. Do a quick and dirty workup of your assets and your expenses. Surprisingly few people, I learned, actually have a detailed and up-to-date sort of budget of where their money is coming and going. Then cut expenses early and often, wherever you can. You can always get it back if you really need it, but I found in doing this myself, I didn't need most of the stuff that I cut anyway, that it had just accumulated. Get your resume in order. But also, not just for the sake of getting another job, use it as an opportunity to really think about what you're good at, what you're most passionate about, and also what you need to improve. In my case, the situation pushed me to learn a whole new set of skills that I now use almost every day. So I think that was the sort of the thinking portion that went into this, but we also have to navigate through troubles with our heart as well. So that means being transparent with people. Put your ego on the shelf and ask for help. I asked people in my life for help. I wrote about my experience on social media. That then led to complete strangers offering to help me. So I think that why I say that is because opening up and asking for help really helps you to connect with other people, with other opportunities that you would not have had you not opened up in the first place. It also reminds you of the inherent goodness of people. People are far kinder and more generous than we're led to believe, and that helps us to feel not so alone.
And you touched on, jobs sometimes being central to your identity. I mean, what do you do if that's the case?
Well, I think we have to feel passionate about and connected to what we do. It has to be meaningful and motivating to us. But at the end of the day, your job is not your identity. You need more diversity in your life, more granularity in the spectrum of your interests. I think it's good to be part of an in-group where you feel included, you feel proficient and competent. Just make sure that you're in a few of those groups. I think doing this also helps to build some redundancy into your resilience, such that if one part of who you are happens to fall away, at least you have others that you can fall back on.
Mm-hmm. And so where do you go from there?
Well, I think that in times of great trial, we really have to protect and nurture our creativity, our imagination. We have to engage this childlike beginner's mind when we start over. Eventually, the pain and the shock of the job loss, they're going to pass. And after you've dealt with the most immediate sort of practicalities of it, getting creative and imaginative, that's what's really going to help you to get back up, to realize your strengths and to start over again.
And yeah, start feeling good. That's a great advice. So with your column this week in mind, what are you grateful for?
Look, I mean, job loss is difficult, obviously. But for the times that I've experienced it, even now in retrospect, I'm grateful for change. Even when that change was unexpected. It's this sort of fierce grace that so many times has allowed unwelcome events to just make space inside me. The reality is that life is going to punch you in the face sometimes.
Yeah.
There's really no two ways about it. It's going to hurt. But, when that happens, and it's not if, it's when, you can ruminate on the idea that it's not supposed to be this way, but eventually that framing is no longer going to serve you. And I think when that happens, remember these words from Mary Oliver. We do one thing or another. We stay the same or we change. Congratulations if you have changed.
So it's an opportunity to change.
I think so.
Yeah, thanks for these thoughts, Mark.
Thank you.
Mark Henick is author of So-Called Normal, a memoir of family, depression, and resilience. He's our CBC mental health columnist.
Little dove, you carry a message of love. Look up above, above, above. You better be falling. Trajectory straight on my heart. You know that I'm all in. Little dove, your message is etched on the side.
Radio 1. I'm Emily Brass. Time now for our CBC Sports Report. Claude Faig joins us now. Good morning, Claude.
Good morning, Emily.
So Blue Bombers can now start looking ahead to the next season, especially their season opener?
Yeah, that's true, Emily. You know, Bomber fans are no doubt still stinging from another Grey Cup loss, but as they say, there's always next year. In fact, the CFL has already released the 2024 schedule. The most notable change is the shift back to a pre-pandemic style schedule. Following the cancellation of the 2020 season due to the pandemic, the CFL focused more on divisional play in an effort to keep travel expenses down. But starting next season, we'll see a return to the balanced schedule with the Bombers playing every team at least twice and every team making at least one trip into IG Field. Now, the league also announced that due to popular demand, it will continue to play the Eastern and Western semifinals and finals on Saturdays in order to avoid NFL TV competition. The Bombers, by the way, will kick off their season June 6 as they play against, yes, the Montreal Alouettes.
Mm-hmm. Wow, yeah, the big winners. That's going to be a hard one for them.
Yeah, there'll be a lot of people looking for that exacting the revenge factor. But, hey, CFL is a great product, and Bombers have been great all these years under Mike O'Shea. So you guys have a good thing going out there.
Let's keep it going. Meanwhile, heartbroken Blue Jays fans could only sit and watch Shohei Ohtani don a different blue and white jersey yesterday. That probably stung a little too.
No doubt, Emily. Much to the dismay of Blue Jays and their fans, the Los Angeles Dodgers showed Shohei the money last weekend, keeping Ohtani in Southern California. And yesterday, the Dodgers formally introduced their new $700 million man. Ohtani, through an interpreter, admitted the Dodgers were his first choice all along, and also acknowledged, like all Blue Jay fans, he was caught up in the middle of the online excitement about his much talked about and tracked rumored flight from SoCal to Toronto, but all from the comfort of his own home.
I didn't see the news itself, but people kept on asking me, like, are you flying to Toronto right now? So I was aware of that whole situation, but I was on my couch with the dog at that time.
Ohtani's deal includes $680 million that will be deferred for 10 years and also includes an opt-out clause should either the principal owner of the Dodgers or its president leave the organization.
And so there was also another milestone moment for women and sports, or that is coming up next weekend in the UK. Tell us about that.
That's true, Emily. It's arguably the biggest footy league in the world. The English Premier League has been around for 31 years. Football has been part of the English fabric and culture for 160 years. But next weekend, there will be a new first for the EPL. Rebecca Welch will become the first female to referee a Premiership match when Fulham faces Burnley on December 23rd. Welch is 40 and a longtime official. She's already officiated a men's match in January of this year, but this one has more meaning and higher implications for Welch.
We talk about role models and about younger people. See me going out and refereeing, they'll think, well, if she can do that, I can do it. You can't be what you can't see. So if you see it, you think it's more believable, where if you don't see it, you think, oh, I couldn't do that because there's nobody like me in that position. So hopefully it'll encourage more people to get involved. And like you say, these conversations won't be happening in 5 or 10 years.
Now, Welch will also rewrite history and mark another first for her hometown of Washington, a suburb of Sunderland in the UK, and the ancestral settlement from where George Washington descended and became the first U.S. president. Emily.
Wow. History and sports holding hands. Thanks, Claude.
Thank you, Emily.
That was Claude Faig from the CBC Sports Desk. It is coming up on local news time, 7:29 right now. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM. It's -4 right now at the Forks, going up to a high of +1 with a mix of sun and clouds today. Mainly cloudy this evening, then partly cloudy overnight, going down to a low of -8. Well, still to come on this hour of the show, a lack of adequate housing in St. Theresa Point First Nation has led to some residents launching a class action lawsuit against the federal government. We'll hear reaction from Canada's Minister of Indigenous Services, who says she's not surprised. And this week we've been hearing about different ways Manitobas spend or save money by thrifting their gifts. We'll hear from a woman who waits until after the holidays to start shopping. The CBC News is next.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg at 7:30. It is Friday, starting merry and mild. We're at -4 right now. A mix of sun and clouds. We're headed to a high today of 1. Hundreds gathered to remember the life of a Winnipeg-born Jewish humanitarian last night. Vivian Silver was killed in the Hamas attacks on Israel on October 7th. Rochelle Gamliel says her sister was down to earth and quietly strong.
We didn't know how much she has impacted the world because we're getting comments and letters and emails from all over the world. Children who had no idea who she was are writing and saying that they want to be like her.
Silver had moved to the kibbutz just kilometers from the Israel-Gaza border because she wanted to be part of a peaceful solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You can hear more about last night's service at the Asper Jewish Community Campus coming up in the next hour of Information Radio just after 8 o'clock. Working from home full-time has hit the end of the road for some workers at Manitoba Public Insurance. The auto insurer has told staff it's moving to a hybrid work model for most employees. That's going to align MPI with other government departments and Crown corporations. Starting in late February, most of MPI staff will be back in the office 5 out of every 10 days they work. That's going to impact about 400 employees who have been working from home full-time. Kate Fensky heads the downtown Winnipeg Biz.
Whether it's a Crown corporation or a private company that is committed to our downtown, that is investing in our downtown and wants our downtown to be successful, having more people here not only improves vibrancy, but it also improves safety. So hearing that hundreds more people might be coming back to work downtown is great news.
But the Union for the Workers says many are upset. The Manitoba Government and General Employees Union says it would have thought MPI would try to rebuild relationships with staff after that long strike that just ended. We are learning more about a 20-year-old woman who died after being shot in Winnipeg last month. Ava Zaber was shot on Burroughs Avenue November 21st. Her family says she was shot inside her home. She leaves behind a young son. Her sister Kelsey is still trying to understand what happened.
It just still doesn't make sense. Like, for something like that to happen to her is just not something we would ever think would happen. Like, the last person, you know?
Zaber's family describes her as a generous person with a great sense of humor. A 20-year-old man has been charged with second-degree murder. Housing concerns of people in St. Theresa Point First Nation are being heard in Ottawa. Earlier this week, CBC shared the stories of 3 grandmothers who live in severely overcrowded and damaged homes. Debbie Harper's adult son created space for himself by building a shack in the backyard, and she is desperate for help.
A home for him that is nice and warm. I need a home for this little family. There's 3 families living in this home. No, 4 families.
Indigenous Services Minister Patty Hajdu says St. Theresa Point received more than $4 million last year for housing, but the government, she says, is open to looking at more options to meet the community's housing needs. You can hear more from Patty Hajdu coming up in the next half hour right here on Information Radio. A British court has awarded Prince Harry $180,000 in damages in his case against the Mirror Group newspaper chain. The case involves 33 news stories the prince claims were acquired through phone taps or other illegal methods. The court ruled in Harry's favor in 15 of those articles. The prince testified during the case. In his opinion, phone hacking was used at an industrial scale across at least 3 newspapers. You can hear more national and international news coming up on World Report at 8. Food inflation is changing how many of us are eating and stocking up on groceries. It's also impacting the holidays. CBC's Rosanna Hempel now on how one Winnipeg family is making ends meet.
Jessie Alcasabas keeps an organized pantry for her growing family of 6, especially with soaring prices at the grocery store.
Prices really have gone crazy.
The Alcasabas family celebrates the holidays with Filipino dishes and traditions, but her husband Gumsy says this year they won't have as many choices.
Because of the beef right now, the prices, I don't think that's part of the menu now.
we're just going to opt to something else.
Although food inflation could ease off in 2024, Canada's latest food price report expects a family of 4 will spend about $700 more next year than in 2023. For Alcasabas, buying bulk, freezing deals and smaller portions on top of meal planning all help maintain bills in their budget.
I look at the prices and I have to compare. Where can I save more? Which is better in the deal?
It's an added step, but they're celebrating being together. Rosanna Hempel, CBC News, Winnipeg.
You can find more news updated throughout the day. Just head to cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
That's Heather Wells from the CBC Manitoba Newsroom. You're listening to Information Radio on 89.3 FM, CBC Radio 1. I'm Emily Brass, filling in for Marcy Marcusa. Our show director is Pat Kanuga. Travis Peterson is producer of our CBC Manitoba YouTube channel, and Brad Lillies is by his side today. Abby Adiemi is our studio technician, and he joins us now with a look at the weather.
Good morning once again. Currently here in Winnipeg, we are at the Fox. We are at -4 degrees, and at the airport it's actually at -10 now, but mainly clear over there. We'll be experiencing a mix of sun and cloud today, and the temperature is going to be hovering around -1 with light winds here and there. But do remember, throughout the day, expect this mix of sun and cloud to continue into the evening period. We're looking at a high of -1. Currently in Brandon, good morning to you. How are you doing? You're currently sitting at -6. It's partly clear over there. You'll be having mainly cloudy skies today and heading to a high of 0. In Thompson is clear at -12, heading to a high of -4. It will be sunny over there as well. Churchill is currently at -15. Sun and cloud throughout the day, and we are currently experiencing some drifting snow. You'll be heading to a high of -13. Good morning, Gimli. You are currently at -2. Dauphin is at -2 and cloudy, heading to a high of 1. Morris is currently at -5, heading to a high of -1 as well. As I mentioned earlier, sunrise this morning will be around 8:20 and sunset around 4:27 p.m. Warm spots in the province is Macri at 1. About one, just sticking around 1 there. And then the cold spot in the province is Tudor Lake at -18.9.
Oh, Tudor Lake.
Yeah, I know.
Bundle up.
And of course, in traffic, we've not gotten anything yet. If you see any report, if you want to report stalls or crashes, feel free to let us know. 788-3093. Once again, in the city of Winnipeg, it is -4.
Thank you, Abby.
You're welcome.
That's Abby Adiemi, our studio technician, and he does the weather here on Information Radio. I'm Emily Brass. A lot of time and money goes into finding the perfect gift. Many people spend the weeks leading up to Christmas in the shopping malls, but a growing group of Manitobans are swapping the chaos of the mall for the thrift store. Kara Colt is one of them. For her and her family, Thriftmas comes a little later than it does for others. Good morning, Kara.
Good morning, Emily.
So why wait until after Christmas to shop for gifts?
Well, it's not that I wait specifically. I mean, there's been times where I've shopped year round, but I mean, there's no pressure because I'm not Christian. The holidays are not my holiday. They're things that, for example, may have been tradition or childhood things, but life has changed and we flux with that too. Often there's really a lot of better deals too after people have returned things over the holidays as well.
That's for sure. So you wait until January to do any gift shopping and then you go with your daughter. What does that shopping day look like?
Well, it's we go where the sales are and we go when the money flows. So January is a good time because, I mean, that's what we decided this year. And that day will look like, a relaxed day where we'll get up whenever we want and maybe eat burgers for breakfast, en route to the city because we live outside of Winnipeg. And we'll make a day of it and it will be relaxing. And what I know is that it's going to be something that she loves dearly because we go together and it's just more of an experience rather than an event we have to recover from for a week.
Right. So even though you don't celebrate Christmas, you still want to, mark the season by giving each other gifts?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been a point of the year, you know, especially like becoming a single mother and going through some difficult times. It was always that one time of year where I would ask her what her big present was, and that was the one present she could guarantee would be from me. And so we kind of continue that tradition. It's just, I always like to think of it as sort of like, you know, the top of the mountain of the year, right? So halfway through, you get to have something brand new that you really need. I think this year for her, it's, I was going to get her a laptop because she's missing one from a few years ago, but clothes is a really big deal, right? She's going to be 15, so yeah.
So is Thrift Miss going to be the same as usual this year? Are you going to be going for the burger and the shopping?
Yeah, we'll have a meal. We'll have a meal here earlier on. I mean, I like to cook, and we, you know, I can do all the traditional things that we're used to, but there's just no pressure on it. It becomes fun. You know, it becomes a nice meal that I can enjoy instead of just having spent, you know, days of being tense about it.
Yeah. So what do you think about society, you know, creating perhaps a culture of buying and putting so much pressure to make everything perfect for the holidays? What do you think about that?
Well, I think perfection is silly. I think that's, you know, I haven't had an enjoyable Christmas with my family for a long time because of just tensions, family issues, right? So to me, I have had to learn how to make it something else for me. And one of the things I've deduced is like most of my friends, like I'm 44, so a lot of my friends in that age category just don't want anything. Like if they're not Christian, if they're not religious, it's not a thing. Just, it's too much work. It becomes gendered, you know, the women do the cooking, the women do the cleaning. It becomes all of these things. And I think so many folks are just tired of. And I want to, like, during holiday, to me, at this point, holiday means self-care, rejuvenation. It doesn't mean burning yourself out for an impossible standard. Because like you said, these holidays are, you know, if you look at all of these holidays, they're commercial holidays. Unless you're truly celebrating the reasons for these things. And I willingly admit, not a Christian, I don't celebrate birth of Christ at Christmas. So what's the reason?
And, you know, like you said, a focus on self-care might be more relaxing and enjoyable anyway. But what are some of the challenges you've run into by doing things in a non-traditional way?
Well, certainly the fact that things get closed at a certain time, or that, the rest of society, like it's hard to go out shopping, period, right now. I mean, economic duress for so many, and then also just that intense anxiety of the season. You know, you see people, you know, it's like you can almost see people as they go into debt just to keep up appearances. It can be hard because my timeline isn't other people's, and I don't like seeing that. It's really hard to even emotionally be around folks this time of year.
Yeah. And then what is it about celebrating the way you do that you especially love?
I love it because it becomes our tradition, and it also teaches us the value of things beyond. Like, we don't even have the Christmas tree up in here at all. Like, I don't really care because it would look sad. We don't have presents. We don't do things that way. But what I love is that it just lets us celebrate being together and thinking about, like, working on our gratitude and thinking about how grateful we are to be where we are in the moment, regardless if it's not what TV might tell us we're supposed to be celebrating.
Yeah. So for other parents who are looking to try alternative ways to celebrate the holidays for the first time, what advice would you have for them?
Well, this has been my daughter's whole life, for example. Like, she just knows I'm a little bit of a different kind of mom. But I would say talk to your kids and ask them, like, especially if dates are not that big of a deal, like, ask them and be rational and let them know, like, things are financially more tough. You know, I'd prefer to do things in a way that works for everyone. Kids are pretty motivated by getting stuff, and they're pretty motivated by getting things they want. So if parents are nervous about talking to their kids about it, I would suggest just leveling with them, you know, because it's a pretty win-win. for everybody.
And I guess, with Thriftmas, a lot of it's thrifted items. How does your daughter react to secondhand gifts?
Well, secondhand gifts, it depends. I mean, she will always get some things that are firsthand, but she's learning to like it more. I mean, Mom, like I upcycle things and I repurpose and make jewelry. I have my own business. She's still not quite there with receiving those kinds of gifts, but certainly like furniture wise and things, she's starting to catch fire and be able to see the vision in a repurposed item. So
a mom's dream. Thanks so much, Kara.
Okay, thank you so much.
That was Kara Colt, a Winnipegger who's celebrating Thriftmas.
Frequencies with Errol Nazareth.
The world is alive with sound, whether across the street or across the pond, from back home or in your own backyard. Every place has a sound and every person has a story. Discover songs and stories from people and communities across Canada and around the world.
Frequencies with host Errol Nazareth. Episodes available on demand on the CBC Listen app.
Just past 7:45, and you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1. I'm Emily Brass. Well, Juno and Grammy winner Kaytranada from Montreal is teasing what's to come in 2024 with some new music. He's enlisted fellow Juno winner Rochelle Jordan for his latest song. Here's Kaytranada and Lover Friend.
Do
CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg, worldwide on our CBC Manitoba YouTube channel and on the CBC Listen app. I'm Emily Brass. Well, people living in St. Teresa Point First Nation say they urgently need adequate housing. Many homes are moldy and need major repairs. Chief Raymond Flett says the most prevalent problem is overcrowding. The band got more than $4 million federal dollars last year for housing, but Flett says that's not enough. Christina Wood is a grandmother who shares her St. Teresa Point home with her extended family. Here she is speaking with CBC's Aaron Broman.
There's me. I live here with my children and my grandchildren. I have 6 children here and 16 grandchildren and 1 son-in-law. So we're crowded. It's hectic, especially in the mornings. They get up to go to school. They go to the washroom one by one. I only have 1 washroom, and that's where they change their clothes to get ready for school. I have 5 bedrooms. It's really small bedrooms, and they sleep in the living room. 3 twin beds we pull out in the living room on the floor. There's no houses for them to move to.
And our CBC reporter Aaron Broman asked the Federal Minister of Indigenous Services, Patty Hajdu, if she's aware of the living conditions in St. Teresa Point.
I am, and I'm aware of the huge gap in housing, actually, for First Nations people on First Nations. That has taken, obviously, decades to arrive at. But actually, I should back up and say that it's actually a product of colonization. I mean, First Nations were always underfunded and always ignored. And in fact, as a process of colonization, that has been part of this country's history. And I think it's great that you're covering the story, and it's great that you're telling Canadians what it actually looks like in many First Nations, not all, but certainly remote communities that really struggle with adequate infrastructure. Since we've taken office, actually, we've increased funding for infrastructure, housing in particular on First Nations, by 1,100%. Now imagine that. Like, that's not a doubling. That's a 10 times as much roughly infrastructure spending as the previous Conservative government. And you still see these huge gaps, which just gives you a sense of the size of the gap of infrastructure on First Nations. You know, the government of Canada has estimated that that gap can be anywhere in the $300 to $400 billion range, not just for housing, but for the other civil infrastructure, community centers, education centers, health centers. And the AFN has also done a similar study on housing and on infrastructure gaps. So we've got a lot of catching up to do. For St. Teresa's Point in particular, last year, I think on top of their base funding, they received, I just want to check the numbers to make sure I'm giving you the accurate numbers, but about $1.7 million last year for housing. And this year we'll receive $4.4 million to accelerate that work to close the gap. But the other challenge I would say that many First Nations are facing is that, again, it's dependent on the First Nation, but people are running out of room to actually build those houses. So reserves, First Nations often have a very small footprint. There are complexities in getting additional land, and so some communities end up being landlocked. So then we work with provinces and territories to secure that land quickly so that communities can then develop another subdivision. And the reality is, in fact, First Nations people have the fastest growing birth rate than any of us in Canada. And so you see families with a number of young children, just like you saw in Teresa's Point, where the crowded conditions make it that much more challenging when you're trying to raise children or make sure that older people have a safe place to live. It's something that we need to work on very closely with each community. And as I said, each community has its own circumstances. But, I will say that the work that my colleague, Minister Fraser, is doing on ensuring that CMHC can better respond to the community's needs to build housing has resulted in the access of rapid housing for First Nations communities in a variety of different forms. And there are always mechanisms that we can use to support communities to work as quickly as they possibly can. But this is something that we do with communities, actually, and it's important because, of course, the federal government will never know what the best solutions are for a community and what their particular circumstances are. And what I would say is that it's important that we don't talk about this as if there's one particular solution. There are multiple solutions and multiple barriers. And so my job as minister is to meet with communities, or ensure my officials are meeting with communities, to uncover what those barriers are and come up with those solutions government-wide, federally, and with our provincial counterparts to more quickly take care of the needs of people within each jurisdiction. I'm more than willing at any time to both sit down with political leadership, like the chief and council, to talk about what those barriers are and how we can more quickly get them a variety of different paths to more affordable housing that can be built quickly. I will be flagging all of this to my team to make sure that there's appropriate follow-up calls that to assure myself that, in fact, solutions are being sought for St. Teresa Point.
Meanwhile, 2 First Nations communities, including St. Teresa Point, have launched a class action lawsuit against the federal government over the state of housing. Here's how Minister Hajdu responded when asked about the lawsuit.
I am not surprised. And, you know, this history, the history of Canada has been one that's been, quite frankly, abhorrently systemically discriminatory to First Nations people. As you know, Canada has just paid out $23 billion in a class action lawsuit on the systemic discrimination within child welfare. And it certainly is my hope that we will reach a Canada one day where First Nations people don't have to sue the government for equity, that we have that fundamentally built in. I look forward to meeting with the chief to talk about what his vision is for the community. And, you know, I'm always happy to meet with chiefs and council as they begin to imagine what a different path looks like.
Canada's Minister of Indigenous Services, Patty Hajdu, speaking with CBC's Aaron Broman. You can read more on this story and see a video tour of some of those overcrowded homes on our website. That's cbc.ca/Manitoba. Just a few minutes before 8 o'clock, and you're listening to information on CBC Radio 1. It's -4 right now at the Forks, going up to a high today of +1. Heather Wells is in our newsroom with the headlines.
Good morning. Well, hundreds gathered to remember the life of a Winnipeg-born Jewish humanitarian last night at the Asper Jewish Community Campus. Vivian Silver was killed in the Hamas attacks on Israel on October 7th. Rochelle Gamliel says her sister was down to earth and quietly strong. We're going to hear from more of Vivian Silver's family coming up in our next news. And you may have noticed, you may have wondered why military planes are flying so low over the city. CBC reporter Megan Ketchison was curious. We're going to tell you what she found out coming up in our next local news at 8:30. And a little hint for you, it has to do with festive lights.
Ooh.
More at 8:30.
Okay, I can't wait to hear. Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
That's CBC's Heather Wells joining us from the newsroom. Well, it's 2 minutes before 8 o'clock. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg, worldwide on our CBC Manitoba YouTube channel and on the CBC Listen app. I'm Emily Brass, filling in today for Marcy Marcusa, and we're just about to the weekend. It is Friday. Good news for everybody. Still to come, as Heather mentioned in the news, hundreds gathered last night to remember the life of a Winnipeg-born Jewish humanitarian. We'll hear from the sister of Vivian Silver. And we'll also hear how the South Asian community in Winnipeg is being celebrated at the next Jets home game. And it's all in the spirit of being inclusive. That's coming up on the next hour of Information Radio. World Report is coming up next.
On Cue with Tom Power.
Few Canadian performances are as iconic as Megan Follows as Anne in the 1985 series Anne of Green Gables.
Plain old unromantic Anne Shirley.
Now Megan is revisiting the story in a new audio series, and she'll talk about how portraying Anne changed her life.
I always felt incredibly grateful.
That's coming up on Cue, followed by Commotion with Elamine Abdel Mahmoud on CBC Radio 1, the CBC Listen app, and everywhere you get your podcasts.
The News is next. Coming up in half an hour, it's The Current with Matt Galloway.
The universe is a hologram, says Sabrina Gonzalez-Patersky, and what we see as the world might be a projection from a wrapper that goes around all of existence. What exactly does that mean? She is here to explain, coming up on The Current.
This is World Report. Good morning from CBC News. I'm John Northcott. We begin in London, where Prince Harry is celebrating a win in a landmark case against the Mirror Group newspapers. He claimed more than 100 news stories were the result of unlawful information gathering, such as phone hacking. The trial considered 33 sample stories. London's High Court ruled that unlawful actions contributed to 15 of them, awarding Prince Harry more than 140,000 British pounds in damages. His lawyer delivered a statement on his behalf after the ruling.
I've been told that slaying dragons will get you burned. But in light of today's victory and the importance of doing what is needed for a free and honest press, it is a worthwhile price to pay. The mission continues.
This lawsuit, just one of many the Duke of Sussex has launched against British tabloids. The victory could be a sign of more success down the line. A contentious gun control bill is on its way to become law in Canada. The Senate passed the Liberal government's Bill C-21 yesterday. First introduced in May of 22, it's since faced backlash for months with legislative hurdles. The bill will freeze handgun sales, increase penalties for firearms trafficking, and try to curb homemade untraceable ghost guns. While gun control advocacy groups welcome the passage of Bill C-21, some say the legislation unfairly targets lawful gun owners. The bill passed without any amendments by a vote of 60 to 24. Close to 1,000 pro-Palestinian demonstrators gathered outside a hotel last night where Justin Trudeau was speaking at a private Liberal fundraiser. The crowd was calling for the Prime Minister to cut off Canadian military support for Israel. Hundreds were waving Palestinian flags and holding signs saying Free Palestine. Dozens of others lay under white sheets in what they called a die-in. The demonstration was organized in part by the group Independent Jewish Voices. Tamara Herman is a member.
There's this belief that the Jewish community as a whole supports Israel and is standing against Trudeau's recent vote at the UN General Assembly in support of a ceasefire. And there's growing contingents of Jewish people everywhere who are deeply, deeply opposed to this. And so it's the last night of Hanukkah, and we're lighting candles for the liberation of Palestinians.
During his speech at the fundraiser, Trudeau did not directly refer to the Israel-Hamas war, referring only to what he calls conflicts in the Middle East. Earlier in the week, Canada was among the 153 countries that voted for the UN resolution calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. It's been another night of heavy bombardments in Gaza, with children among those reported killed in Han Yunis and Rafah. Injured Palestinians rushed to Nasser Hospital after an airstrike on Han Yunis. The rising number of civilian deaths is a growing concern for the U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is spending a second day in the region. He's urging Israeli leaders to shift their tactics to exercise more precision in order to minimize the impact on civilians. But he's casting the blame for the high civilian casualties on the shoulders of Hamas.
Using civilians as human shields, using protected sites like hospitals and schools for military purposes, embedding themselves among the innocent Palestinian people, and continuing to fire rockets at Israeli cities, and continuing to go out on the airwaves and say, we're going to commit October 7th again and again and again.
Sullivan has also visited Ramallah in the occupied West Bank, where Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas told him the U.S. must intervene to force Israel to stop its attack on Palestinian people. Meanwhile, the Israeli military says it has recovered the bodies of 3 hostages. A court in the Netherlands has dismissed claims by human rights groups that the Dutch government was aiding Israeli war crimes in Gaza. The groups wanted the court to block the export of some military supplies to Israel. Freelance journalist Lauren Comato is in The Hague. Lauren, take us through the issue here.
Okay, so basically, three human rights organizations, including Oxfam and Amnesty International, took the Dutch state to court, saying that by sending parts for the F-35 fighter jets to Israel, that the Netherlands could be complicit in any alleged war crimes. The context is that the Netherlands is one of three places in Europe that warehouses these parts. What the court found today is that although it is likely that war crimes are being committed and the F-35s play a role, when it comes to policy decisions and political considerations, the court has to give the government a wide leeway. For now, it looks like the Dutch government will continue to send these supplies to Israel.
Lauren, what was the reasoning of the court for dismissing the demands of the rights group?
It's very much a legal loophole. There was a permit in 2016 that outlined the conditions of the government being able to send these parts. And so the state argued under that agreement, we've gone through the human rights concerned, it's all good. But the lawyers here are saying, you know what, that was 8 years ago and the situation has changed and you actually, under European law, need to consider human rights when you make your policy decisions. So this case is thought to be the first in the world dealing with this issue. And Michael Servaes, who's the executive director of Oxfam Netherlands, said that while he's disappointed in the verdict, they're most likely going to appeal.
Freelance journalist Lauren Cometeau in The Hague. Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you.
European Union leaders have failed to reach a deal to unlock $70 billion in new aid for Ukraine after a veto by Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. The deadlock happened just hours after leaders agreed to start long-awaited membership talks with Kyiv. Alex Carrier reports from the European Council in Brussels.
The EU's 27 leaders worked late into the night, frantically trying to break the deadlock. They hoped to convince Hungary's Viktor Orban to lift his opposition to the new multi-billion-dollar package of aid to Ukraine. The money, a mix of grants, loans and military support, would be a lifeline for the country as it staves off Russia's invasion. But Budapest won't budge. The leaders threw in the towel overnight, opting to try again at an emergency meeting in January. Belgium's Prime Minister Alexander De Croo says a deal is within reach. This will be a bittersweet moment for Ukraine. Earlier in the negotiations, EU leaders made the historic decision to open membership talks with Kyiv, a move which means the country can start on the long and complicated road to joining the European Union. But in the short term, fears of waning support here in Brussels and among lawmakers on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. will be a profound cause for concern for Ukraine. EU leaders say the country is not running out of money soon and that a deal on longer-term support is within reach. They'll be back here in January to try and get that over the line. Alex Carrier for CBC News at the European Council in Brussels.
2023 was a brutal year for natural disasters in Canada and also a record-setting year for the number of days the Canadian military spent on domestic operations. Now, top commanders say the troops are feeling the strain. They're suggesting the forces may have been called upon too often. The CBC's Murray Brewster has more.
We conducted 141 days in a row of Operation Lentis in 5 different provinces on 8 different operations.
Vice Admiral Bob Ochterlony, the military's operational commander, taking stock of the year that was in natural disasters and the number of times the military was called out to help. The wildfire evacuation of Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories, an example of where no one else but the military could have pulled it off. Ochterlony is not sure, however, the same can be said for all provincial requests.
So the question becomes, do they require the Canadian Armed Forces sometimes? Sometimes they do, absolutely, not questioning that, but probably not every time.
Ochterlony's remarks, coming as they do at the end of the country's worst wildfire season, reflect a growing frustration in the military, which is devoting more and more resources to something many believe is not part of its core function. The House of Commons Defence Committee has, for months, been wrestling with questions of whether soldiers should be fighting wildfires and cleaning up after hurricanes. Emergency Preparedness Minister Harjit Sajjan says a review is underway.
We're analyzing what type of things that the Canadian Armed Forces have been asked to do that can be done by somebody else, and only look at the Canadian Armed Forces for what is absolutely needed.
Defence Minister Bill Blair says he understands the concerns about overuse of the forces, but underlined the military is very much in the room when the decisions about domestic deployments are being made. Murray Brewster, CBC News, Ottawa.
And finally, Toronto's iconic Yonge Dundas Square is getting a new name, Sankofa Square. City Council voted late last night to rename the popular intersection. It also recommended a host of other landmarks to drop the Dundas name because of Henry Dundas's connections to the transatlantic slave trade. The new name, Sankofa, originates from Ghana. City officials say it is a concept that refers to the act of reflecting on the teachings from the past to enable people to move forward together. And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. Remember, for news anytime, you can go to our website, cbcnews.ca. I'm John Northcott. This is CBC News.
Good morning, Manitoba. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg, worldwide on our CBC Manitoba YouTube channel and on the CBC Listen app. I'm Emily Brass, filling in for Marcy Marcusa. And here's what's still coming up on the show. The Winnipeg Jets are taking on an initiative to be more inclusive to all Manitobans. The South Asian community will be celebrated at the team's next game. We'll hear from them a bit later on in this half hour. But first, hundreds gathered last night to remember the life of a Winnipeg-born Jewish humanitarian. We'll hear from the sister of Vivian Silver coming up on Information Radio. Eleven minutes after 8 o'clock, time for news headlines with Heather Wells.
Good morning. Well, the Union for Manitoba Public Insurance Employees says many of its members are upset at having to move back to the office. The corporation is putting the brakes on full-time remote work for some employees. Starting in February, some 400 remote employees are going to be working in the office at least part-time. Somebody's happy about it, and that's Kate Fensky at the Downtown Winnipeg Biz. We'll hear from her. And does the high price of food have you making changes to your Christmas menu? We're going to hear from one Winnipeg family who's trimming a bit off their Christmas meal. That's coming up in our next news at 8:30.
Thanks, Heather.
You're welcome.
That's Heather Wells from the CBC News Desk. A quick traffic note for you. Anna called the traffic line at 788-3093. Thanks for calling, Anna. She's going westbound on Notre Dame, just west of McPhillips, and says traffic is crawling on that way of that part of the street while the eastbound traffic is still moving. She's not sure what's slowing it down, but maybe you know, maybe you see something or something else somewhere else in the city. Give our traffic line a call at 788-3093. Abby Adiemi's here now with a look at the weather.
Thanks, Emily. Currently in Winnipeg, we are at -4 degrees, and at the airport, we are currently at -10. Though mainly clear there, we'll be experiencing a mix of sun and cloud today. The temperature is going to be hovering around -1 degrees with light winds blowing here and there. And throughout the day, expect that mix of sun and cloud to continue. We're going to be looking at a high of -1, as mentioned. And as the night descends on us, Winnipeg will turn mainly cloudy, gradually clearing after midnight, and then the temperature is going to be dropping to a low of -3. Looking ahead at what tomorrow looks like, you need to get ready for a mainly sunny sky, and the skies are going to be really sunny tomorrow. However, you need to brace yourself for increasing cloudiness late in the afternoon. And looking at John's forecast for tomorrow, we'll be having some wind. The wind is not going to be much. It's just going to be mainly mix of sun and clouds. Yes, that's just going to be it. And according to John Sutter, we're going to be below average of looking at Saturday, Sunday, and into next week. We're just going to stay below average. Currently in Winnipeg, we are at -4.
It's 13 minutes after 8 o'clock. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1. I'm Emily Brass. Well, as you've been hearing in Heather's newscasts, hundreds gathered last night to remember the life of a Winnipeg-born Jewish humanitarian. Vivian Silver was killed in the Hamas attacks on Israel on October 7th. Silver had moved to the kibbutz just kilometers away from the Israel-Gaza border because she wanted to be part of a peaceful solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Silver left Winnipeg for Israel 50 years ago, but always kept her Winnipeg ties close. Rochelle Gamliel told the crowd at the Asper Jewish Community Campus that her sister was down to earth and quietly strong.
My sister Vivian was just that. She was a sister, a mother, a savta, a daughter, a cousin, and an aunt. She was my ally, my confidant, and my hero. We did a million ordinary things together, but to me, they were all extraordinary. To me, it is surreal to be speaking to all of you about my sister and to hear the accolades that have been written and spoken about her these past few months. She always believed that the smallest of actions could result in the greatest achievements. She loved being the tour guide of the Negev, proudly showing off her kibbutz to ambassadors, diplomats, politicians, family, and friends. She believed that women in the kibbutz could do any and all jobs that they desired. We were similar in that way. She was in charge of construction in Kibbutz Gezer, and I drove a tractor in the cotton fields and orange groves in Kibbutz Palmachim. She also loved hiking around the country, biking in her fields, playing piano, passionate about her relationships with her friends, and most of all, spending time with her 4 grandchildren. She loved discussing with me different designs for birthday cakes she would make for them, whether they were trains, dinosaurs, or skateboards. We took a couple of Schwester-only holidays. We met up in San Francisco and hiked along the North Shore, rode the local buses with our dedicated maps, and took the ferry on a whim to check out a little island community. This past July, we met up in Niagara-on-the-Lake, where we took a 20-kilometer bike ride through the vineyards of the area, drinking and laughing the whole way. Her desire for peace was ingrained in her very being. She held on to the hope that it could happen, because without that hope, she could not have carried on with the work that she did. My family has received countless messages from around the world, from those who believed in her, who joined her path towards cooperation amongst all people, and were touched by her positive attitude. You would need to search through many pictures to find one of Vivian not smiling broadly. Vivian meant the world to me. We were very close, not only as sisters, but as best friends. She lives inside of me, in my heart, and I find it impossible that I will never speak with her or see her again. We are all devastated, not only with the loss of this international peace activist, but as an integral part of our family. I'm heartbroken.
That was Rochelle Gamliel. She's the sister of Vivian Silver, and she was speaking last night at a memorial at the Asper Jewish Community Campus.
What's new in news? How about a streaming channel from CBC that goes beyond the news? Get the big picture with a closer look at everything from dating to music to crime in the new series Big. Discover daily conversations about the questions we're all asking on About That with Andrew Chang. And for all the fascinating things on Earth, watch Planet Wonder. CBC News Explorer. Available free on CBC Gem and CBC News app.
Good morning, Manitoba. It's 18 minutes after 8 o'clock, -4 at the Forks. Mix of sun and clouds today, going up to a high of +1. I'm Emily Brass, filling in for Marcy Marcusa. You're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg, as well worldwide on our CBC Manitoba YouTube channel and on the CBC Listen app. Well, this Saturday marks an important date for members of Winnipeg's South Asian community. It's the second Winnipeg Jets South Asian Heritage Night. And to celebrate, members of Winnipeg's South Asian community will perform the Canadian national anthem in Punjabi. CBC's Jim Agapito was at the rehearsal.
The true north, strong and free. Duron dur tak ho.
My name is Simar Sethi. I'm going to be singing the national anthem for Canada with another vocalist, and then I'm going to be doing the solo for the American anthem. I've actually never sung anything like this in Punjabi, so it is definitely like a first-time experience. Like, I've done hymns in Punjabi, so it's not like I don't have any trouble with the language, but I haven't. This is definitely like a first unique experience. I'm a little nervous. It's a little overwhelming.
What did it feel like there, practicing on the ice?
I was really cold, but other than that, it was good. It was nice.
You're doing it at a Jets game.
I'm not really a sports fan in general. It's a huge honor. Like, I know of the Winnipeg Jets. Like, my mom just told me it was like for a hockey game, and I'm like, oh, maybe it's like a small like little school hockey game. And then somebody told me they were the Jets, and I'm like, Mom, you forgot to mention that this was the Winnipeg Jets. Like, I'm going to be singing for the Winnipeg Jets. But yeah, it's crazy. But I'm really honored.
Kiran Ball Saroy. So we're a group of local musicians that have come together for this wonderful event. We decided to collaborate with the South Asian Heritage Night for the Jets game.
How does it feel to be doing this?
It's a great honor and a great privilege to be able to express our culture in such an amazing event that has been put on by the Jets. There are a lot of South Asian communities in Winnipeg, and so it's a great collaboration. I've got myself and my friend who will be on instrumentals, stringed instruments for the anthem. And then we've got some local musicians that will be on harmonium and tabla for the charge songs throughout the game.
Okay, how hard was it to be able to do this and get the national anthem in your instruments and in your language?
Well, I'm very blessed to have an amazing teacher in Toronto, Rupinder Singh, who has taught me how to play the taus. And so he helped me compose the music for the anthem. And in terms of the charge songs, like, we've got some very talented musicians that it's just in their blood. It comes naturally. So we've come up with those pretty quickly.
And from what I gather is that you did this as a labor of love.
So I've been involved in music for some time. My music teacher will be playing with the charge songs as well. So I learned from him, and then I decided to, spread the love, and I taught music for the past 7 years. So that was just something that I did voluntarily that keeps kids busy and out of trouble.
What's your regular day job again?
So I'm a dentist by profession, and this is just kind of my labor of love. I'm passionate about my career as a dentist, and I'm very passionate about music. So with passion, it comes very easily.
The instrument that you played, can you describe and tell us what that is?
Sure. So the instrument that I'm playing is called taus. It's a Persian word that means peacock, and you'll be able to see that it's shaped like a peacock, and it's a stringed instrument that's played with a bow. It's a custom-made instrument. I can't even put a price tag on it. It's handmade. I had this handmade from India in 2006. In terms of temperature, these instruments are extremely temperature sensitive, so we have to be very careful with timing. And the strings are metal, and the leather on the base of the resonator can contract with temperature changes.
In terms of the singers and practicing for this, how hard was that to do?
So we came together pretty quickly. We've had private rehearsals at my place, and so it came together very nicely. We also had some rehearsals with the Amber Trails Elementary School, and so we went there to practice with the children.
Are you a hockey fan?
I am a big-time hockey fan. Go Jets, go!
There's a Hockey Night Canada broadcast in Punjab. How does it feel to be able to do this, do that, and all of these things coming together?
It's so amazing. It's so humbling. It's just what Canada represents, inclusivity, fairness, and it's just a labor of love for everyone, and it's amazing that everyone can come together to celebrate this night.
Name is Gunny Mon. So I'm on the Winnipeg Jets Advisory Council,
and I'm also the ambassador to the South Asian community, the hockey ambassador for the South Asian community. And I'm one of the organizers for South Asian Heritage Night.
Now, how did you find Kieran and that group?
So we're lucky to be old family friends, and that's another Winnipeg secret, that everybody knows everybody. So once the news broke that we have this opportunity, we connected, and it was a great collaboration to find, again, local musicians, to find all this local talent. And that's the best thing about the Winnipeg Jets, is they love to showcase all Winnipeg and local talent.
You know, you have your community, the Punjabi community. What does that mean for you?
For me personally, I think it just speaks to the strength of Canada and the diversity that Canada holds. And it's an initiative that is often spoken about, but very few times can you see it in action. And Winnipeg Jets and True North have done a fantastic job in celebrating culture and mixing it with sport. And to share the NHL platform with your local communities and to highlight them and to celebrate them is such a huge moment for all of these communities, especially ours. Being a Winnipeg born and raised and a huge Jets fan is very, very touching, and it's very important to us. It's an incredibly proud moment. It shows the rest of the country that, as beautiful as our national anthem is in English and in French, for have it sung in different languages and to be celebrated equally is a huge moment for all Canadians, not just the South Asian community, is that this anthem resonates with everyone that is proud to call themselves Canadians.
That was CBC's Jim Agapito at a rehearsal for the Winnipeg Jets South Asian Heritage Night. The Canadian national anthem will be performed in Punjabi at tomorrow's Jets game against the Colorado Avalanche. 25 minutes after 8 o'clock, and you're listening to Information Radio on CBC Radio 1. I'm Emily Brass. Well, we often reflect on the positive feelings that surround the holiday season, but sometimes you just gotta sing the blues. Here's Donna Merrow doing just that with Even Santa Claus Gets the Blues.
Lost my favorite bum
Ho, ho, ho comes out. That was Winnipeg's own Donna Mara with Even Santa Claus Gets the Blues. We're coming up on local news time, and after that, you're going to hear from the current former NHL player. Sheldon Kennedy says the new Federal Sports Commission is a start, but sports culture itself needs to change. He says too many young players in many sports are abused and maltreated, as he was. That'll be on the current. The CBC News is next.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 8:30, it is -4 in downtown Winnipeg. It's going to be a beautiful, mild day. Mix of sun and clouds, light wind, and a high today of 1. Remembering the life of a Winnipeg-born Jewish humanitarian.
It's a Crown Corporation or a private.
Hundreds at a memorial for Vivian Silver last night at the Asper Jewish Community Campus. Silver was killed when Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th. One of her sons says his mother was fierce in her work. Yonatan Zeigen also says his mother would be heartbroken to see how the war between the two sides is unfolding.
I can imagine her saying, "Not in my name." I don't know if she would have had any answers, but seeing so much pain and destruction, the continuation of this pain since the 7th, no end in sight.
Silver lived on a kibbutz near the Israel-Gaza border. Her sister says they have been getting letters from people all over the world telling of the impact of Silver's work for peace. We are learning more about a 20-year-old woman who died after being shot in Winnipeg last month. Ava Zaber was shot on Burroughs on November 21st. Her family says she was shot inside her home. She leaves behind a young son. Her sister, Kelsey, is still trying to understand what happened.
It just still doesn't make sense. Like, for something like that to happen to her is just not something we would ever think would happen. Like, the last person, you know.
Zaber's family describes her as a generous person with a great sense of humor. A 20-year-old man has been charged with second-degree murder. Working from home full-time has hit the end of the road for some workers at Manitoba Public Insurance. The auto insurer has told staff it's moving to a hybrid work model for most employees that will align MPI with other government departments and Crown corporations. So, starting in late February, most of MPI's staff will be in the office 5 out of every 10 days they work. The impact will be on 400 employees who have been working from home full-time. Kate Fensky heads the downtown Winnipeg Biz.
Whether it's a Crown Corporation or a private company that is committed to our downtown, that is investing in our downtown and wants our downtown to be successful, having more people here not only improves vibrancy, but it also improves safety. So hearing that hundreds more people might be coming back to work downtown is great news.
But the Union for the Workers says many are upset. The Manitoba Government and General Employees Union says it would have thought MPI would try to rebuild relationships with staff after the long strike that just ended. People in St. Theresa Point First Nation are getting the attention of the Federal Indigenous Services Minister. Earlier this week, CBC shared the stories of people in the community living in overcrowded houses full of mold, desperate for help. Federal Minister Patty Hajdu says St. Theresa Point received more than $4 million last year for housing, But the government, she says, is open to looking at more options to meet the community's housing needs.
This is a conversation I'm happy to have with the chief to understand better how we support his ambition and his vision for the future of the community.
St. Teresa Point is home to some 4,000 people. The chief says they need about 300 homes. A Winnipeg family is adjusting its holiday menu this year because of the high cost of food. Gumsi Alcasabas says his family of 6 celebrates the holidays with Filipino dishes and traditions. In his culture, he says they show hospitality mainly through food.
The more that you see, the more welcome you are. That's how we see it. Now, I guess we're just going to be doing small portions and do a little bit of variety versus before, big portions, more variety.
Dalhousie University's Agri-Food Analytics Lab says the cost of holiday food staples like carrots, potatoes, beef, and turkey is up between 5 and 13% since last year. The lab expects many Canadians to choose lower cost options this season. Well, have you been seeing and hearing low-flying military aircraft over Winnipeg lately? If you're wondering what they're doing, you're not alone. It turns out those flights serve a dual purpose. 17-wing Public Affairs tells CBC this morning they're training flights for crews of 435 and 402 squadrons and a large Hercules aircraft. They're also annual family lights flights. It's an opportunity to let some of the families with young children get a special view of holiday lights across the city. 17 Wings says they do adhere to low-level flight limits over the city of Winnipeg. But if you haven't seen them, don't bother trying to look for them this week. The festive lights flights are finished for the season. You can find other news, though. All you have to do is go to cbc.ca/Manitoba.
I bet that was a great site.
Can you imagine? I think what a fun way to see the city over the holidays.
I'm a little jealous. Thank you, Heather. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too.
That was Heather Wells from the CBC News Desk. And we want to take a little time to thank everyone who helped us put together the shows all week. Wendy Parker, Corey Funk, Abby Adiyemi, Nolan Kaler, May McKillop, Bruce Layden, Chloe Friesen, Dylan Longhurst, Jim Agapito, Isa Kixon, Chidi Ikuma, Kalkadan Mulugeto, and Sierra Sanders. Our community reporter is Shanley Vidal, and our YouTube producer is Travis Peterson. Our producers are Margot Watt, who retired this week, and retiring next week is our show director, Pat Kanuga. And I want to say a special thanks to Pat for all his support and encouragement as I hosted the morning show for the first time this week. And we're going to miss you a lot, Pat. Nellie Gonzalez is the show's producer of current affairs, and Leif Larson is the senior producer of audio. And here's our studio technician, Abby Adiyemi, with a last look at the forecast.
Currently in Winnipeg, we are at -4. We're expecting a mix of sun and cloud all through the day, and tonight will be mainly cloudy. Temperature is going to drop to a low of -3, and earlier I said we were going to be below average. Actually, we're going to be above average from next week on.
Thank you, Abby. I'm Emily Brass, signing off for now. Hope you have a great weekend. The Current is up next.